have the agenda up, right? If you're just joining us, thank you for your patience. We're working on some technical glitches, and right now people are still connecting, so we'll wait just a minute while that catches up.
I left again, I'm gonna try it again.
You might set that on this machine?
Oh,
yeah.
I'm gonna try it by just going to the website. It doesn't seem to recognize me as a participant, because like when I go to the website under the meeting number, it's like treating me like I'm just coming in off the public. Yeah.
Okay, I think it's stabilized. Are you guys, you still need to do stuff over there, Rustin, or can we go in? Okay, I think we're ready to go.
Okay, so we'll call this meeting of the Board of Education of the City Schools of Decatur to order at 6:50 on, what is it, December 8th? And we have four members of the Board of Education are here at the Wilson Center together, and then we have Jana Johnson Davis joining us from Zoom, if all members are present. And let's begin our meeting with a moment of silence. Now, if the members will all please rise and say the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, just to let everybody know, I guess we should begin and just ask if anyone has any revisions to the agenda, and then I'll explain what's in it. Are there revisions to the agenda?
Do you need to pull the bond resolution from consent agenda, James?
Yeah.
Okay.
We're voting on it.
So we'll pull that as the first action item from consent.
Okay. All right, and otherwise, just to let the folks who've joined us know, we will be discussing the second semester planning. This is the reopening discussion. Is the item that it's item 5 on the agenda, but we'll get to it just right away. And what we'll do is we'll have a presentation from either Dr. Duty or
Dr. Furman.
Dr. Furman about the plan. There'll be some board discussion of the plan, and then the public comment period will follow that immediately. If you'd like to sign up for public comment, please go ahead and do so now, and I'm going to have someone else explain how to do it. Thank you.
So there is a link in the agenda under the public comment link. There's a hyperlink to the Google form where you sign up for public comment.
So please go ahead and do that. We'll be here until everybody gets a chance to speak who'd like to speak. If you have problems signing up, send the board an email, send us a text, one way or another, get a hold of us, and we'll make sure that you get your shot. Okay, with that, let's move to the minutes. We have minutes that have been presented from the regular board meeting on November 10. from the special board meeting or work session on October 27th, and from the regular monthly meeting on October 13th. Does anyone have any revisions to the amendment, or to the minutes? No. Okay, so those minutes will be entered as presented. And next, right before the opening discussion, we first have our spotlight, which is going to feature Tally Street Upper Elementary. David?
All right, who is running the spotlight? Is it a video this time, right? Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay, Shayna is gonna launch our video. You might have to share a different window, if that popped up in a different window, Shane. There you go.
Board of Education spotlight. This has been such an unprecedented time since opening the school in August. Hi, I'm Billy Heaton, principal of Tally Street Upper Elementary School. I'm excited to be here for Tally Street's first Board of Education spotlight. This has been such an unprecedented time since opening the school in August of 2019 as CSD's newest school. And though we had to close the building in March to transition to virtual learning, I'm proud of the equity work that we have started and work that continues. This work began by forming the school's first equity committee. This equity committee has done some truly amazing work, including facilitating a book study last summer with our faculty and staff on the book Stamped, Racism, Anti-Racism, and You by Jason Reynolds and Ibram Kendi. The committee will begin facilitating another book study for our faculty and staff in January on the book How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram Kendi. The school continues to purchase new library books and level text for our level book room to support and diversify our reading collection for our students. And we held a pretty spectacular wax museum to celebrate Black History Month last February. The PTO and its Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee have been very supportive of our work and have also sponsored many other offerings, including the Tally Dream Book Club, where our students read books featuring diverse characters and experiences and meet to discuss them. The PTO has offered the potluck dinner Peace and Pie. The potluck dinner included conversations centered around topics such as social justice, race, and community. The PTO sponsored our Black History Month and celebration. This included donating the book 28 Days, Moments in Black History That Changed the World to every one of our teachers. The celebration also included an evening event which featured music, dance, Tally Street's chorus, and the winners of the school's spoken word competition. Finally, our PTO is currently sponsoring a series for parents and faculty entitled The Myths of Racism and Beyond, Personal and Community Reflections. This group meets once a month and will continue to meet throughout the school year. To end our spotlight tonight, I would like to present a video highlighting some of Tally's events since we've opened. The video was produced by one of Tally's fifth grade students, Sasha Twemlow, who demonstrates the school's IB learner traits of risk taker and communicator. I hope you enjoy.
Hey there, have you heard? Tally Street, 5th, 4th, and 3rd. A brand new school on Tally Street. Got the best crew that you ever meet. Working hard to learn together. Remembering to help each other.
Graduated from high school when I was 15 years old. After graduating from Morehouse College, I went to seminary school up in Boston. There, I was elected as president of my mostly white senior class.
I am Hank Aaron, born in Mobile, Alabama. I grew up playing sports. I was 18. I quit high school to join the Negro Baseball League World Series.
Hi, Tally Tigers. Now it's time for this week's shout-outs.
Hi, Tally Tigers. This is Miss Sanders, and I am so excited to shout out a few kids from my homeroom and Miss Fredette's homeroom. So Ellie from my homeroom and Nia and Max from Miss Fredette's homeroom. We spent some time together on Wednesday, Wellness Wednesday, working on writing, and we're able to crank out a bunch of writing and catch up to where we needed to be. They worked really hard, asked questions, did research, and I'm just really proud of them for stepping up and doing what they needed to do. So 1, 2, 3, shout out.
Hi, Tally Tigers. I want to give a shout out to my teacher, Miss Irons, for being just a great teacher and giving me my level math problems and making them fun and making school fun, especially because it's virtual learning. And I want to give a shout out to Miss Irons, my teacher. 1, 2, 3, shout out. Thank you, Tally Tigers. Bye.
Hey, Tally Tigers. This is Miss Irons here to give a shout out. This week, I'm going to shout out 2 friends. And these 2 friends displayed the habit of character of problem solving and perseverance. We were working in a small group together, and they were both having a difficult time with the concept. Neither one of them gave up. They persevered. They worked hard through it. They tried to solve the problem on their own. They asked me for help when they needed help. But in the end, I want to just say how much I appreciate the fact that they persevered and they did not give up. My shout outs go to Audrey Tolsma and Sebastian Moultrie. 1, 2, 3, shout out.
Awesome, that was fun. Was anyone else reminiscing when we used to get back, we used to be able to get together in social situations, like
In a minute.
the good old days?
Do they do those shout outs like every day?
Yeah, well, I think that's from the Tally Rally, which I think they do once a week, and all the schools are doing, you know how we had all our different types of gatherings and stuff, they have virtual versions of those now.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's really cool.
Well, thank you, Mr. Heaton. We move on now to, it's now the second semester planning discussion, so take it away.
Yeah, so we're gonna turn it over to Dr. Furman. She is gonna lead us through the presentation itself. You'll find it's very similar to what we talked about Thursday night. We just tried to put it in a nicer form so people can kind of digest, what the plan looks like. I would ask if possible, to hold your questions to the end, because I noticed as I went through it with Teacher Advisory Council, there were things I knew were gonna be answered coming up. And so if you could maybe just jot down your questions, there's a good chance it might get, answered in a future slide. So, she's gonna walk us through that, and then at the very end, I'm gonna take over, because we have two kind of big topics to talk about, at the end, to kind of see where you are as a board and where we might go in what direction. Do we need to make you a co-host?
Yes.
Do you want?
Okay, now I got it.
Okay, there. So as she's pulling that up, I would share, we had a great meeting with Teacher Advisory Council, just before this meeting, and we went through the presentation with them. I think they're pleased with it. They, realized that it, is a good compromise of a lot of different things, and so we got very good feedback from them. So, I felt, they felt like we listened to their feedback and others' feedback and tried to make the best plan we could. So, I appreciated getting their feedback, that they recognized, they could see a lot of the things that we had tried to do in the plan, that they had suggested. So, all right, Maggie, you want to take it away?
I'm sitting a little further away, just to make sure everyone can hear me. Is that okay? Make sure everyone.
We can hear you.
Jana, can you give us a thumbs up if you can hear Maggie?
Hey, Dana, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, well, welcome everyone. Greetings, board members, Dr. Dede. Glad to be here tonight to present, information about what could possibly be our next stages, for phased-in learning for students. So first, I want to highlight the idea of competing priorities within our school district. So we know that City Schools of Decatur, we serve our students and we are responsible for their education, but we also have to make sure we're prioritizing their physical and mental well-being. But then we also have our staff, and we've got to make sure that we provide a safe and secure learning environment, not just for our students, but for our staff as well. And then in this new era of COVID-19, we're also dealing with the science, mitigation and transmission, and what does that look like? And sometimes these things may seem like they compete with each other, and you can't do in-person learning and keep your staff safe because of the science. But we understand that at the same time, we've got to find a common ground to move forward for next steps. So we're hopeful that everyone will see through this presentation that the next steps we plan on taking, when we eventually do take those steps, is trying to find that common ground between all three of these different groups. So this was the information that the student-focused subcommittee from the stakeholder planning group came up with, and this is really helping us focus on how do we make decisions that keep students at the forefront of the decisions. So these were some of the agreements, these are all of the agreements that our student sub-focused committee came up with, and it basically explains that for CSD, we exist to provide education to our students. That's the whole reason that we are here, and that we want that to be the highest quality education possible. We also understand that students learn best when they are safe, engaged, empowered, to learn with a highly trained teacher who facilitates students to become leaders of their own learning, and that really ties us into not just our EL framework, but our IB framework about how our students learn. We also understand that one size doesn't fit all. What works for one student in one classroom doesn't necessarily work for another student in another classroom. So we have to make sure. Oh, okay. Thank you. So we have to make sure that all of our students' needs are met through different in-person learning experiences, but also understanding that most of our students, this need is met by attending school in person with their teachers and peers. We also want to make sure that whatever we do as a school system, we're using a continuous quality improvement plan to monitor our goals and our achievements and make sure that we're meeting all those goals. And then finally, because of COVID, we have to understand that we are mitigating risk to the greatest extent possible so that our students can make the best decision for what works for their family. But like I said, we also have our staff. Our staff is also a very important part of what we do to provide that education. As I mentioned in the student-focused subcommittee agreement, we have to have highly qualified staff to provide that service. So in order to make sure we have highly qualified staff and are attracting and retaining highly qualified staff, we want to make sure that we are mitigating risk to the greatest extent possible, but also from the students who recognize that one size does not fit all. So we have an accommodation process in place. We're enhancing that accommodation process to meet more needs of more staff, and that we can accomplish meeting the needs for all of our staff. We are going to make sure we provide all PPE equipment that's necessary for our staff. Like Dr. Judy mentioned, our Teacher Advisory Council has reviewed the plans that we've been vetting and putting forth to the community, and they are meeting with Dr. Judy on a regular basis, and they are really the way that the teacher voice becomes an equal partner in how we make decisions. And then finally, City Schools of Decatur is committed to supporting our teachers by going above and beyond federal leave acts and state leave acts. And what that means is we have to quarantine a teacher for a specific reason, but we won't make them take their own leave. We'll be kind of eating that cost to help support our teachers through this pandemic. The next stage we talked about in that circle that you saw, guiding principles for mitigation and transmission. And this is a graphic that's been out there, starting to circulate about this Swiss cheese model of mitigation in schools. So one of the things that I'll mention later is we, as a school district, we can't control mitigation in our community, but we can, and we can do it really well within our schools and within the four walls of our classrooms. So it's not about one mitigation strategy alone. It is about multiple layers of mitigation strategies, of which I'll explain a little bit more detail as we get through the rest of this presentation. But we do believe that we can control mitigation within our schools. And as I mentioned, not in the community, but in our schools, we can put things in place. Yes.
I'm sure the report from outside was that shuffling of papers, which are more members than you to keep up, is drowning out some of their voice.
Can we just move that closer to her, so if I'm muted? Like if we just wheel this over for now?
Okay, hopefully that's better. Thank you, Heather. Okay, so as I mentioned, we cannot control mitigation in the community. That's outside of our realm of influence, but we can influence mitigation within our schools, within our four walls of our classrooms. City Schools of Decatur also believes that schools are not actually a major transmission site of COVID-19 once effective mitigation is in place. So we are going to continue to implement our highly effective mitigation strategies, of which cohorting, which I'll talk about a little bit later, is going to be a very important mitigation strategy as we look at bringing the possibility of moving into another phase of returning our K-5 students to the classroom. But also understanding that, again, our students, we believe, learn best in person along with their teachers and their peers. Did want to give a shout out to our community stakeholder planning group that did put together a lot of work and a lot of time. We do know that they provided a lot of talent and expertise. I think one of the presenters at one point said that we probably have the most per capita scientists and epidemiologists within our school district, and that's probably true. And they provided a lot of best practices and recommendations for what we can do going forward. And if you want to see the final report, it is linked there. So let's talk about learning options. So where have we been? So we started off full virtual in August. We moved into a hybrid A schedule for phase A, which was bringing back our adapted special ed students. We put pods in place. We had in-school proposals for return to in-person, and that has been started since October, and we're still going through with the hybrid phase A as we finish out this first semester. So where are we going? We have to make sure we've got a plan and a roadmap to help guide us for the next steps that we're going to take as a school system. So we do want to do this gradually and under a very controlled way. So we are recommending that we look at adding 2 new phases. Hybrid B phase would be a modified schedule for in-person learning of core academics for our preschool through 5th grade students. With date, we don't know yet. And hybrid C phase would be more bringing back our 6-12 students and possibly even extending that learning hours for our early learning students in elementary school. Let me give you an overview of hybrid B, what that may look like. So we are recommending that our pre-K schedule is a hybrid schedule where students are split in half. One of the main concerns that came up as we discussed returning earlier was that right from the start has class size limits, and we wanted to make sure that we're able to make that a manageable size for those pre-K teachers at College Heights. So we are recommending that, and we do have different restrictions that come into place from the grants that fund the majority of this program, and this is a hybrid schedule that they will allow us to do. So then we're also looking for K-5 students attending school in person just to attend their core academic classes. Our special classes, intervention classes, those would be offered virtually, completed at home. We also heard another main concern of our teachers as we went through the first phase of this process was the possibility of students taking their masks off. And this was confirmed by our mitigation group when they said taking masks off is one of the most dangerous times for contracting and spreading the virus. So we wanted to figure out how can we eliminate that possibility. So what outside of the box thinking could we do? So we said, why don't we come in part day, cohort our students, and have grab-and-go meals so they can eat at home. So, but as we looked at this, like I mentioned earlier, 612, it's a little more difficult to move this into the upper grade band. So our recommendation for hybrid B is that we still keep 612 students virtual. In the hybrid B schedule, the options, we will have an in-person learning option, and we are recommending a full virtual learning option as well. The hybrid schedule for students for pre-K, this is just for our pre-K, would be 2 full days on site. They have 3 days at home for learning, and then all students receive on-site instruction for 2 days. They will take home kits that will be provided so that when they're home, it's not necessarily sitting in front of the screen, but more interactive type activities for those students. There will be virtual learning for our pre-K students, that they will follow some of that, but it will be enhanced by those take-home supplemental instructional kits. It is a balance of synchronous and asynchronous instruction, and our teachers will continue with their one-on-one family check-ins so they can make sure that those students are progressing as well through their academics in the pre-K setting. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about what pre-K, or what K-5 hybrid in Plan B would look like. So again, in-person and virtual learning options. So the in-person learning would strictly focus on our core academics, reading, writing, and arithmetic. We would have a modified schedule where students would attend about 4 hours each day, would be in the morning across the district. So this would be all of our K-5 students coming in the morning. Afternoon, we do have proposals for how students can continue their learning when they get home. And we are very much limiting concurrent teaching. At this point, I don't know that we have any proposals for concurrent teaching in the K-5 setting. Now, we are also wanting to make sure that those parents and families and staff that are needing a full virtual model can have that opportunity. So we are going to designate full virtual teachers. We are going to continue to use our guidance that we created over the summer for how the virtual instruction will be run. We do anticipate that all the hours for synchronous learning will remain consistent. We heard loud and clear as we started talking with parents about options, is they wanted to make sure if we do in person, that we keep our rigorous virtual learning option available, and we feel like we can do that. A big component of this is virtual specials, and that was another part of the outside of the box thinking that came up when we were brainstorming how can we move forward for this. Virtual specials the concern with with in-person specials was these specials teachers bounce between so many groups of students. So in 1 week, they may teach 20 different classrooms of students, and we wanted to make sure that we were limiting that exposure for those teachers. We thought about offering virtual specials in the classroom, but then our core teachers don't get a planning time. So shortening our school day, number one, allowed us to not have to do mask-free time at school. Students are not eating at school, and also helped protect those specials teachers so they didn't have to bounce around between so many classrooms, and it helped protect our core teacher planning time. So some more information about hybrid schedule B for K-5. We know that because of how we're going to have students come back, we are going to have some class changes. So let's say, for example, at Oakhurst, she has, let's say, for example, 4 second grade teachers. Of her second grade students, let's say 50% want to come back, but let's say of her 4 second grade teachers, only 1, because of accommodations, can teach in person. So we're gonna have to figure out how to staff the other in-person classroom and the virtual classroom. So there is gonna have to probably be some shuffling. And we are setting priorities to make sure that if we do have to do that, we can and will mostly try to keep classrooms together if they have to move, so that students have familiar faces. But we do want to be very upfront that hybrid option B is going to have to create some class roster changes to accommodate the need for staff that we want to keep them in the virtual setting. Like I said, every effort is going to be made to minimize those changes. But at the school, we're definitely going to prioritize keeping students together. We did want teachers to know that they may have to be reassigned. So another option would be they only need, let's say, 4 virtual teachers at one school, but at school A, but the other one, at school B, only needs 1 virtual teacher. So we may have to send some of our virtual teachers from one school to help cover classes at another school. Okay, so the other thing that as we go through this process is we need to see if we can offer the in-person learning 5 days a week or if we're gonna have to split rosters. So we are committed to 6 feet social distancing within our classrooms. All of our principals have measured their classes. They've got a list of their classrooms and how many kids they can put in the classroom. And the most I've seen is at the high school, it's a little higher, but K-5, I think the highest number is 15, and we're committed to meeting that number. But some of them are as low as 10, just depending on the size of the classroom and the furniture in the room. So in order to meet that, we have to look at our numbers once the survey comes back and how many kids want to come back to in-person. And if we can fit all those kids that want to come back to in-person within the classroom and keep that social distancing, then our in-person students can attend all 5 days. However, the option is if they're not, we can split the rosters and have half the class come 2 days and half the class come another 2 days. And we'll talk about, we will have at-home learning opportunities for those students when they are not in the classroom. Okay, so hybrid virtual school. So if you are a parent or a teacher that you want to remain in the full virtual setting, we are going to continue with full virtual instruction. The students, we're going to group them, like I said, to the greatest extent possible by class, if not class, by school. But being very upfront that this is going to mean some students have to get reassigned. But I also want to be clear, if there is teacher A, Miss Smith teaches at Winona Park, and her parents say, we love her so much, we don't want to lose her, we'll all stay virtual. That's not an option. Either you are virtual or you in person, then we will figure out who, based on as much matching as possible, what your teacher will look like. But we cannot guarantee that if all of your students stay virtual and your teacher is virtual, that you will still have that teacher. We just can't make that promise. Let's see, synchronous learning, as I mentioned before, we are going to keep that consistent in our new virtual learning, full virtual learning option. We are adding instructional time to Wellness Wednesday. We are going to commit to at least half day of instructional academics during Wellness Wednesdays and do more embedding of the social emotional learning in the daily practice with our teachers. For 6-12, even though we are continuing as planned with full virtual for those grade levels, we are definitely wanting to continue with that Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, but we do hear our parents and we do know that we need to start offering more instruction on Wednesday. So we are anticipating at least a half a day of instruction for our 6-12 students as well on Wednesdays. That leads us to Wellness Wednesday. So grades K-5, Wellness Wednesday will be an instructional day for the in-person and for virtual students. Teacher planning time in the modified schedule puts additional planning time in the teacher's in-person schedule more consistently throughout the week. So we feel like we no longer need that full day of planning for the teachers. 6-12, we're going to really target enrichment and remediation opportunities for our students that need those enrichment and remediation opportunities, but at the same time, providing every student some asynchronous learning on that Wednesday as well. And I've seen some really inventive and creative plans at the high school and middle school, so I'm really excited for what they're offering. And then all students, the shortened holiday week of January 6th when they come back, we're not going to have Wellness Wednesday on January 6th, so that will be an instructional day. And then we are anticipating our last Wellness Wednesday, regardless of when we move back to more in-person, will be January 13th. So, learning choices, we've mentioned this before at our board meetings and with parents. We do need to resurvey our parents. So our learning choice survey is going to go out tomorrow morning. Parents, we're asking a really quick turnaround on this. I know this is a tight timeline for people to make a decision, but we're really trying to get that number back so that we can move in the next steps of planning if that's what we decide to do, and follow up with parents next week on any parents that had it selected. So the selections that they make, we're asking parents that this selection you choose will stay in place unless CSD makes another major change in our learning options. So if we get to, let's say, mid-March, and we're ready to bring everyone back the whole time because there's whatever happening in our community, we will resurvey parents. The other thing is that families we know have changes in their lifestyle or something happens with the job and there's a need to send a student back to in-person even though they had previously selected virtual, we will go ahead and let them communicate that with their school principal. So the survey will ask parents to select one of these 4 options. If they want to return in person, that's their first desire. They really need their child back in a classroom. Option 2 is, yes, I really want my kid back in a classroom, but if you need the space, I can stay virtual. The third option is, I prefer virtual learning, but if you've got room and you want more kids to fill those seats, I'll send my kid. And the last option would be, I really am still dedicated to full virtual learning. Did want to just point out that we will continue to offer supports for our students in special programs like Gifted, 504s, ESOL, Special Ed, all of our title programs. We're going to be ramping up what those supports look like through our Wednesday increased instructional time. Okay, so let's talk about mitigation. I did want to point out that our mitigation subcommittee did a thorough review of our CSD COVID Safety Facilities and Healthy Schools Manual. They vetted the strategies that we had already proposed to use in that, but they also made recommendations for several enhancements and things that we could do above and beyond. But I also want to point out that there was quite a bit of recognition that what we're doing in City Schools of Decatur is way far above and beyond what other school districts are doing. So the mitigation strategies, and I'm going to talk more about these as we go through, so I'm not going to talk about them so individually right here, but I did want to comment on the very last one, is we have a building checklist that our mitigation team is using and has created for us. And what they've done is, it is pretty much a rubric to measure the level of mitigation in our school, and it's a tool we can use ongoing so that we can go back in every once a week and check the mitigation. Is this happening? Is this happening? Is this happening? We definitely wanted a tool to help measure mitigation over time and make sure we are holding up our end of the bargain with our parents and our teachers of saying, yes, we have highly effective mitigation strategies in our buildings. So I've mentioned before, cohorting for hybrid option B is one of the biggest mitigation strategies that we're proposing for this schedule. And it's basically, once we know who wants to come back, who doesn't, we can create cohorts of students. And as I mentioned, the max would be 15 students per group, and we will not cross cohorts. So once you are in a cohort, that is your group of people you attend school with, and you attend school with only those people and that teacher. So there is going to be some, if there are opportunities where students would have to go to a pull-out class or a separate class, we're looking at how that will happen in the virtual setting, how it can happen during the async or the at-home learning time in the afternoon or on the Wellness Wednesday. So we've got several really good options to continue with all the interventions and supports while maintaining our cohorts at the K-5 level. It becomes a lot difficult at 6-12. Foreign language, our students, how they move between different foreign language classes, accelerated math, all the different interventions and supports at the middle school and high school level make it much more difficult. Now, it can be done, but it creates cohorts of students that are much bigger than 15. And right now, we feel strongly that 15 is about the largest cohort of students that we want to bring back in to ensure that level of mitigation is appropriate. Face coverings, that is another big layer of cheese that is in our mitigation plan. And that layer of cheese is a non-negotiable. It's 100% mandated mask wearing for students. We are working on putting it as part of our dress code to make sure that it's a requirement. And in any CSD building, you have to wear a mask. And that's just what we need to ensure health and safety for our staff and students. And there is an opportunity, there's a way that we're going to have parents also sign off on a pledge when they send their students back about the masks. We've already talked a lot about these facility improvements. I really want to call out the HVAC. That has become one of the kind of holdups for returning to school, but our mitigation committee really praised our operations executive director, Sergio, on his work he's already done with HVAC. They recommended some additional opportunities to enhance the HVAC, which he is really looking at considering and taking and putting into place, but they felt really good with what we already have going in HVAC. The cleaning and sanitizing was another mitigation strategy that came up and was vetted by our subcommittee, and they approved of what we had and offered some additional strategies for us to put in place, which we are definitely going to do. And these are additional sinks, frequent hand washing, teaching our students how to do that, and then all of the cleaning supplies being provided to teachers in their classrooms. More information on cleaning and sanitizing, those high-touch areas being cleaned at least 4 times a day, flushing the bathroom drains, because students aren't using those as frequently, and even our bathroom drain up here got hot one day. I was like, what's happening? So that is something that is definitely a need. Disinfecting classrooms when needed with the electrostatic foggers, and then making sure we have trained and adequately supported our custodians with what they need for their daily responsibilities. A really positive piece about bringing students back to in-person learning is that we can now provide students daily with food. So every day when students that come into the building, they would leave that day with a grab-and-go lunch and their breakfast for the next day. And because school nutrition is still providing meals free of cost, it will help us support our school and nutrition department by giving lunches, making sure every student has a lunch. And we will continue for students that do stay full in the full virtual setting, those students will also be able to continue with their lunches, pick up, grab and go. Transportation, this definitely is one of the mitigation places where mitigation sometimes can become a little bit more not as tight as we can do in our classrooms, but we do feel very confident that those people that need transportation will have a safe transportation to and from school. The bus drivers will be cleaning and disinfecting their buses between every route. We will be requiring face coverings while people ride the bus. There'll be hand sanitizer, and the ventilation piece, even though we may not be, we'll open the windows when we can, but we definitely will open that vent that is on the top of the bus. But really, social distancing is one of the main mitigation strategies on the bus, in addition to face masks and ventilation. We definitely want to encourage our parents, because the K-5 schools are pretty spread out. If they can walk or ride to school or get a ride with their parent, we are encouraging that they do that, to get their own way to school instead of riding a bus. Health and safety. So this is continued with mitigation strategies actually, but it is categorized under health and safety. So there was some new recommendations from the CDC about decreasing the number of days in quarantine from to 7 to 10 from 14. CSD, we feel that because the levels are so high and we are just now kind of having this idea of bringing students back in a very controlled way, that we want to maintain that 14-day quarantine for people that may have been exposed to COVID or were showing symptoms. And we can look at decreasing that as we know more about what this looks like in our school buildings. We do have very rigorous protocols for staff and students if they become ill during the school day, and those are outlined very generally here, but also very specifically in our COVID manual. We definitely rely on our school nurses to evaluate our students. We'll be calling parents and isolating students if they are showing symptoms at school. Staff, making sure they notify their supervisor, having them leave as soon as possible, contact their healthcare provider. And obviously, if a staff member is too ill to drive home, we will make sure we can get them home some way, or if we need to call 911, we will do that. So a lot of questions about what happens if my teacher has to quarantine? What happens if a student has to quarantine? So this chart really explains when we would do full in-person learning, when students would just do their learning at home versus when we may have to say this whole class is in virtual learning. So if our teacher is well and the students are well, we're doing in-person learning. Then we go into the middle column where some students may need quarantine. If it's if it's not a whole class that need in quarantine, we are going to continue with in-person learning, and that the quarantine students, just like we do with kids that are out because they're sick, they're going to be working with that teacher on asynchronous learning activities. We are continuing to use Google Classroom even with our students that are coming in person, even though that's not going to be how they learn during the school day. We are going to continue to use that electronic learning platform to help manage learning materials for those students. And then if students and teacher are quarantined, we would revert to a virtual learning for all students. And then there's just more specific details about what happens if the teacher is quarantined but can teach, or the teacher is quarantined and can't teach. Contact tracing, I attended an orientation today. We're training a new round of staff members. Our administrative assistants at each school are also being trained to do contact tracing. Our nurses have already completed the training. Our AAs are in the process of doing that. And we've also hired additional health aides for our larger schools to help support with contact tracing. Our communication protocol, this was developed when we worked on our manual, and this has also been vetted by our communication subcommittee. This just outlines the steps that we use as we communicate what's happening in our schools and how we're doing it. And you'll see that the end result is that we post all of our COVID positives and or exposures on our dashboard. So that is going to continue as well. We are going to do staff and student screeners. Staff, we already have a QR code that they check before they enter a building. And students, we've got a graphic that we'll share with parents and train parents on how to screen their child each day before they come to school. So that brings us to our parent COVID compact. So we are asking any parent that wants to send students back to in-person learning to sign off on an agreement. And this does help them understand the mandatory mask wearing, as well as what possible consequences could come into play if their student is non-compliant wearing a mask, which would end up in, hey, if you can't comply over a certain period of time, that it does mean we have to send your child back to the full virtual setting. There also is an agreement that they will check their child for daily symptoms and what they do if a child is showing symptoms, as well as if their child becomes sick, that they do need to make sure they can come and get their child within an hour. Accommodations for staff. So we did hear our teachers loud and clear that there are some teachers requesting accommodations because of who they live with and their living arrangement. And I'll tell you, having spoke with all the teachers going through this process, there are teachers that, I would say, no, you should not be coming to school, and want to make sure that we've done everything we can to help protect that staff and their family members. So we are expanding it. We have a process, I would say 99.99% ironed out. I just wanted to make sure we got approval tonight to move forward with that, and we'll share that process with teachers tomorrow. So we will have staff, supervisors, principals sharing this process out tomorrow with their staff about how they can request an accommodation that is not because of their own impairment, but because someone they live with. Okay, so we've got some supports for staff and students and families ready to go. Pods, we've heard pods have been very effective, been very great. We want to continue with pods as much as necessary. The difference with K-5 pods is we're going to limit those to afternoons only because we'll have in-person learning in the morning, we'll have afternoon pods in the afternoon. And the other great thing about continuing supporting with the pods is the pod facilitators can still continue to work for CSD and come in the morning, and if there's a teacher that's out and we need coverage, we can use them to help cover classes, and in the afternoon they can help facilitate pods. We are going to cohort pods. We'll have to, once we see who wants to come in person and who needs a pod, we'll be trying to group those to cohort those students as well. And we are going to continue with secondary pods until we are ready to say, let's phase back in our 6-12 students. We do understand that this has been a very stressful time for staff and students, and we do want to make sure that we are offering support for emotional well-being for our staff. We've already been doing a training on community resilience, trauma-informed approach to help increase mental well-being after stressful events. Doing check-ins with our staff on increasing those, and our student center at the high school is offering individual and group counseling services. And then we've got some other Tier 1 social emotional support groups getting ready to start, particularly through our crew meetings and those different opportunities at each school. So our next step, is we gotta communicate all this information with our community, and our staff. We've gotta launch our K-5 survey. We need to make sure we process all of our, enhanced accommodation requests. And what I can say is any staff member that has completed the accommodation packet, the interactive packet, we will let them know no later than Friday if their accommodation has been approved to work remote. Then we need to make decisions on, can we bring all the kids that want to come back, or do we have to look at that nuanced information about someone that wants to be in person but could stay virtual and figure that piece out. And then we'll be communicating to the families how many days a week their child would attend. And each school has been working with me to work on their schedules and what those look like. So we would be having schools communicate those details out to their communities.
All right, thanks, Maggie, I appreciate it. So, we can jump into some questions, and then at some point, the topic, you'll see the two big things that were not in those slides were about what role metrics are going to play and dates for when things are gonna happen, because there's an intersection between those two things that we need to talk about, and, I kind of come to some sort of consensus on, hopefully. So, that, you know, if your question is, where are those? That's because we need to talk about it. So if you want to jump in and ask questions now of Maggie, maybe now we can do that. Either of us can answer any questions about this, and we have some folks online as well if it's too specialized that we need to pull somebody in. And then if we can at some point then segue into that discussion of metrics and dates, that would be awesome, so.
Don't want to start with the small stuff?
Yeah, let's do that. Yeah. So I have a quick question, Maggie. Thank you for a very thorough presentation. I appreciate it. Answered a lot of questions I had and that I've received from parents, so I'll be able to answer them if they're not on meeting. So is the reason why we haven't added 6 through 12 to this plan yet because it's going to be a lot harder to figure out, you know, how to operate?
It's all about cohorts.
All about the cohort?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
and so, have we looked at what other potential high school and middle schools are doing, and what have we seen that, you know, they're kind of like leaning towards, like?
We have, and middle school and high school are either not cohorting at all or are doing much bigger cohorts.
Okay.
So setting our cohort number to 15 very much limits grouping students at a high school and middle school setting. High school is nearly impossible to cohort at 15 size. Middle school is doable. It would, and Greg and his admin team have been amazing, and we've been back and forth for several days. Hey, what about this idea? What about this idea? And without having 100% confidence of a size of 15 students cohorting, we just don't feel comfortable bringing them back just yet. So like I said, we can cohort at middle, definitely, but it's a much bigger size than 15. It's probably closer to like 45 to 60, which is just, we're just not comfortable with that high number of students intermixing at this point with the different teachers that they would have to be attending class with. So yeah, cohorting is possible. It's just bigger sizes at the middle school level, and high school is even bigger.
And I would add, as part of what we're hoping to do is, like, so for instance, 6th grade may be easier to do cohorts of a smaller size than 7th and 8th, because they start to specialize more in 7th and 8th. So if we get to the point that we feel like we can have maybe not cohorts of 15, but maybe some decent sized cohorts, and we feel like it's safe to do so, we may then bring back 6th grade, right? And then at some future point, when we feel like we can have maybe, as long as we can keep them in their whole team or something, right? And they're not interacting with the whole school, just within their team, maybe we can bring back 7th and 8th grade, you know, so that's part of where that phasing comes in. But we heard loud and clear how important cohorting is, right? Mask and cohorting and social distancing are the top 3 things that people want to see and that are supported for limiting transmission. So as we can get those, it's possible we may be able to address them at grade levels, not entire schools all at once.
Are there certain subjects that are causing that? Like, is it because of, like, the specials that are causing that? And is there a way that we could eliminate some of those classes at school or do them virtually?
Like
Well, so some of it we could do the way we're doing at K-5, where like the special site courses are offered virtually for that reason.
Yeah.
Some of it is, we start to specialize more in the middle school, so you may have a special math class, everything else you're together, or now we have 3 different language options, so you may have a German teacher who has to teach in 3 different teams or something like that. It's because as you get more specialized, it's harder to do the cohorting because of that.
Can you have cohorts within, I'm probably not gonna be able to make this make sense, but cohorts within classes, so for instance, if the whole class has to be the cohort, that's really very, very restrictive. But if you could identify, you know, like, well, these 6, so a class might have 6 groups of, or 4 groups of 6 people. These 6 can hang together, and they're pretty much a cohort, but they always sit together. So they're really a cohort within the class, and you could have some divisions, even plexiglass. I mean, I'm wondering if there's a way that we can be, I mean, if we're gonna insist on these cohorts, we can't make it so restrictive that it turns out that by insisting on strict cohorting, we're just not going back.
Well, I think as in a future phase, we probably could. I think but our concern is, we feel like with those small cohorts that I call pure cohorts, right? There's no intermixing at all happening, that you can do that safely at almost any virus transmission level probably, right? Because it's very controlled. But as soon as you start putting in things like that, where you have groups of, like the groups are intermixing, even if the kids themselves are moving as a cohort, I would want to see much lower transmission levels before we get to that point, because you are introducing a whole nother variable of risk at that point. So that's kind of what our discussion has been about it. But it also gets to the metrics part of the discussion too, that we need to have at some point. So some of that maybe we could talk about with that.
I have a
Do we
question.
have any examples of, is there any example that we're following behind? Is there any exemplary system?
Not for cohorting at the high school and middle school level.
Well, I think for one thing, we're just going so far above and beyond
Right.
what everyone else is doing. I don't know of examples that look like that.
I've talked with several principals of middle schools in my old district, and then we've had some parents who sent us some example schedules, and they help. But if we are setting this number at 15 for what we feel comfortable with cohorting, then it's very hard to do at the middle school and high school, and then and we can create these cohorts within cohorts, but then we start grouping students in very interesting ways that it just kind of defeats that purpose. So right now, I just saying, not that we can't do it, we just also need a little more time with 6th grade and 7th grade and 8th grade in high school to investigate what that looks like. And if we want to try to say, let's try to get our lower elementary students and our elementary students back to an in-person learning option sooner than later, I think we can start with this and then still continue to work on the 6-12 model. And then I also think with the enhanced learning on Wednesdays, really targeting students with additional instructional time, as well as the interventions and enrichment activities that we can confidently help support those students that have been struggling.
I have a question about cohorts. So when the students in the afternoon go to the pods, we're breaking that cohort, right?
We had a great discussion about that, Jana. It's a really good point. So the way the discussion went, at first we said, so we can't do pods for that exact reason, because we don't want to introduce differences in cohorts. But then the discussion went to the parents who are using the pods are the parents who have to have an option for their kids. And so would we rather have a controlled option where we know where the kids are and we can try to keep them as cohorted as possible in pods in a very controlled environment? Or would we rather say pods aren't safe, therefore parents, go take your kids somewhere else where we don't know where you're taking them and what they're doing and what strategies are in place? And so we decided that we would err on the side of offering the pods because we can do that in a much more controlled environment than what would probably happen if for those parents who had to have that as an option.
Okay. I have another question about the Get Well room. If kids seem to be exhibiting symptoms, but they've not been tested, you could having multiple kids in the Get Well room, one who may in fact have COVID, one who may just be exhibiting some sinus symptoms or allergy symptoms or something like that. And I was just wondering about the safety of having multiple people in the get well room, not knowing who has COVID or not.
I mean, at some point, it's a balancing act, right? You could add additional get well rooms and take them out of circulation from other uses. We're not anticipating that big of a demand for the get well rooms, and we're hoping that we can make do with what we've got. And they're putting extra precautions in place. You may have seen in the Healthy Schools manual about the get well rooms. But part of it is, again, just that balancing, right, of trying to figure out every time we add another space, for instance, as a get well room, we're taking a space away from some other use. And so I guess it's a balancing act, right? There is a chance that could happen, and there's a chance it wouldn't happen. So we're just trying to balance between the two.
And then also, that's another reason we're asking parents to pick up their child as soon as possible.
Yeah.
On Wellness Wednesdays for the K through 5, are those being synchronous for the children? They're in person, I guess?
So that's one of the, okay, so if we have numbers where kids can attend 5 days, that'll be full in person.
Okay.
They'll be in school on Wednesday, just like they were Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday.
Okay.
If the numbers get to a point where we cannot socially distance within our classrooms, we are looking at what Wednesday will look like, and we are recommending that possibly that would be a remote learning day for all of the in-person students. And the other reason being is, one week you come Wednesday, 1 week you don't. Does that get people confused? Do we need, how does that operate? But if we also are doing a full virtual day, we can still do in-person synchronous learning. We can still do the asynchronous, as well as targeting some of those interventions.
Okay. And if it is that you have to do a split schedule, would that Wednesday, if it's not in person, would it or could it be synchronous as opposed to asynchronous?
It will be synchronous, yeah.
And is that true for 6 to 12 as well?
Yes.
Okay, because I just noticed we talked about, on that slide, it says grade 6 through 12, all students will have asynchronous learning assignments. Is that in addition to synchronous learning on Wellness Wednesdays?
So the high school is looking, I haven't seen the middle school what their final proposal is. The high school is looking at doing live synchronous learning activities for their students on Wednesdays. And then advisement, they've got TOK and CAS that they're trying to follow up with. It's abbreviated, it's not the full day, because we do want to provide those teachers with some planning time on Wednesday. But it is definitely like, hey, how can we support our students with some synchronous learning? Maybe it's not direct instruction, maybe it's more of a check-in, how are you doing? Let's talk about this project. But there's a couple different options out there, but we do definitely, and there is more of the targeted interventions and enrichment, so help gifted teachers plugging in more with their gifted students on Wednesdays, intervention teachers offering more of those services on Wednesdays as well.
Okay, so just to clarify, there is going to be synchronous learning on Wednesdays for 6 through 12?
Yes.
Okay.
I had a question regarding, 2 questions regarding quarantining. So the one page said that if some students are quarantined, then in-person learning would continue. Is the sum going to be clarified in the metrics conversation? What would some be?
There are times that only a portion of the class is quarantined because their exposure was not in class, for instance, right? So you may have 3 kids who are in a class that had an exposure at home, and they happen to be in the same class, and so now they have to quarantine. So that's how you could end up with a portion of your class quarantining when the rest of the class isn't.
Okay.
Was that question?
If there was I guess if it could be traced to, well, if students, if we cannot trace it to where they got it from, how they contracted it, then the entire class would be quarantined? There would be no in-person learning?
No, not quite. So the way the contact tracing works is when you hear of a case, you try to figure out who that person had contact with. The contact tracing is not trying to figure out where they got it, it's trying to figure out who they might have given it to. And so that's what contact tracing is about. And so, when we learn of a case, either because someone has reported it to us or through Department of Public Health, our nurses then track down where was that person in the days leading up to that, where they might have been contagious, and try to figure out who they had contact with within our school so that we can quarantine those people.
Okay, but I was still just trying to figure out, how would you determine when that class needed to be continue with some students in-person learning and when the entire class would need to be quarantined?
So an entire class might be quarantined if, like, there is a student that came to school and then we find out that night that they have symptoms and they go take a test and it turns out they did have COVID-19, that whole class would then be quarantined because they were probably exposed to the virus from that student.
Okay. Okay, and if a student tests positive at one school and they have siblings at another school, or if one of their classmates tests positive at one school and they have siblings at a different school, what happens then?
So I'll do my best to explain it. It's laid out in more detail in the manual, but what the contact tracing and quarantining is about, that first tier of contacts, not the second and third and fourth tier, right? And so let's say that a student was diagnosed positive and they have siblings at another school, and those siblings are showing no symptoms and maybe even tested negative. That you do not need to then quarantine everyone the siblings had contact with, but you would quarantine the siblings because they had contact with a COVID-19 positive person. If one of those siblings then either tested positive or developed symptoms, you would then go quarantine people that person had contact with leading up to that. So you don't go, I can't remember if they call it tier 2 or tier 3. You don't go to that next tier of people for quarantining until you have a reason to do that because of someone who has symptoms or has a positive test.
Okay.
And is there any way similar to how we require vaccinations? Is there a way to require that in any way for COVID testing before we go into in-person for either staff or students?
So we are exploring the option. One of the recommendations to consider from the virus testing subcommittee was consider offering tests to all of the staff right before they start in person so that you have time to get the results so you know. So we are investigating that, like a kind of a startup test, right? Like we're about to go back, let's do kind of a blanket test so we have some certainty of what we're going into right off the bat. So we are exploring that. I don't know if it's going to be feasible or not, but that is one of the considerations we have. The other thing we're looking at is, would it be valuable to try to set up testing so that, like, let's say every Friday afternoon, all the employees who are in person take a test, so that way by Monday we know whether they tested positive or not, so that they can then have the weekend to process the test. So we're looking at that, we're looking at the costs involved in it, but those are two possible recommendations from that committee, so.
And then just the agreement with the parents will be more so how we keep that under control for students that potentially.
Correct, so the parent compact, the idea is like, that community social responsibility idea of it takes all of us to make this work. And so in exchange for you sending your child in person, you're agreeing to do these things. Like basically be responsible, right? Like don't send your kid if you're sick, if they're sick. Don't send your kid if they've had any kind of an exposure, you know, those kind of things that we're all agreeing to do this to make this thing work. So that's what that one's about.
I have a couple questions, not directly about the plan, but kind of relevant.
Yep.
One of them, which is easy, is will we be, you know, all masks aren't the same, right? And so some cloth masks are good, and if they're 5 layers, it's a good thing, and if they're not, and a bandanas, you might as well not have one. So are we gonna mandate effective masks? And will we be providing, it's my understanding that these disposable surgeons things are supposed to be better than the cloth masks, and they're also really cheap. You know,
So we have a large, we have a large supply of masks, kind of like what, Bill has on over there, so that if kids don't have masks, or if they have masks that are just not effective, we have masks like that we'd be able to give them.
And there'll be some policing, it'll be expected that if you come with a bandana.
And wearing it correctly, right?
Yeah, it's really detailed in the safety manual.
The second question is about the ventilation system, and there's some emails today, that actually resonated with me because I had read something about using CO2 monitors as a proxy to make sure that you've got adequate ventilation. I don't know what the levels ought to be, but the idea is that if there's too much CO2, you're not ventilating enough, and it's a sign that you need to do better. And I understand that there's, because of some pre-existing issues over there at Renfro, that there was something going on. But I guess it seemed to me like a reasonable request that we would supply these CO2 monitors, maybe not one for every room, but maybe one for a wing, and actually listen to the results, and if it, you know, whatever the right number is, if there's an issue, address it, figure some additional.
So we do regular testing, and we did bring in an engineer at least to look at Renfro and maybe others, I can't remember. One of the things we're doing differently, because that concern does come up often from the same people at the same school, is we are creating a website where we're posting all of those results. So every time they're done, a water test, an air test, an engineering report of the HVAC system, whatever it is, we're gonna post them all online, so that anyone who wants to see what those look like, they can keep up to date on it anytime they want. So
Do we have a schedule, kind of like you would have to check the bathrooms and make sure that it's clean? So
for testing their schedules, yes, and, for the engineering one, that was really special to this, to say, hey, we put in this new system, we want the system evaluated basically to make sure it's working the way we think.
Just going down the list. The other is learning support options, and you know, I'm very concerned that we're not gonna get the older kids back into school. And we can talk about that more. But it's very clear, and you know, we've gotten hundreds of emails, which I'll be honest, I couldn't read them all this time because I've gotten so many. Many saying, you know, so many of these kids are thriving, which I don't doubt. I've seen it with my own eyes, many are. But those folks need to understand that many are not, right? And so none of us can speak in universals here. But what we know is that a large fraction of kids are not doing well in virtual learning. And we need to do better for them. And you know, I don't know what that's gonna look like, but right now it's not good enough. Through no fault, I think, of, you know, the great efforts of the staff, but it's just not working for many. It is for many others. But part of that needs to be the safety net that we need to do. I know that we are not doing a good job of identifying those kids who are falling through the cracks and reaching out to the kids and the parents and saying, this isn't working. What can we do to help? It's not happening. And it needs to. And I guess I hear that it's happening, but I'm just telling you that it's not. And so I mean,
it is happening, but maybe not universally, I think is your point, right?
It is not happening enough. And so, I mean, we need if it's gonna be this way, then we need to do a much better job of identifying the kids that we are failing and reaching out to help them. And so I guess, you know, where is we're trying our best, it's good enough. So what's the plan? Because we need a plan, and it's not, we don't have it now.
And I assume you're talking specifically like 612, right?
612.
Yeah.
Well, if they're the ones who are gonna be home, right, if we're gonna leave those kids at home, how are we gonna identify the kids who need that help and make sure they're getting it?
Have you had conversations with the high school about that?
The middle school's already started bringing students in person of the high needs group on Wednesdays. I think they've had like 35 or 40 students coming on Wednesday.
High needs defined. Are these predefined high needs kids?
No, I have to ask Greg for specifics on that, but it is kind of a rolling high need of, okay, who is not logging in, who's not doing their work, who's failing a class, who's not participating. The high school has a proposal ready to go. They're very eager to start bringing students back on Wednesdays, in particular for for some in-person learning options.
I have the same question written down, Louis, and but from a different angle. If I'm a parent, and right now it seems like my recourse is to email the school board because my kid is failing for mental health, what would your two recommendation be? Because obviously that's not a solution. I mean, Heather Tell is a wonderful real estate agent. She is not a trained mental health expert for middle school students, to my knowledge. What's the gap there? What should they do? How do they?
The first thing I would always say is reach out to your teacher, right? So especially at the elementary level, reach out to your teacher, because they're the best contact to get you in touch with the right people. We have counselors at every single school for this exact reason, right? And so reach out to the counselor, reach out to the principal, reach out to somebody at the school level is probably your best bet to get the fastest result. You can always, like, people email me, and then Shana catches it and sends it off to the right person to say, hey, here's a need at your school, whatever. But the teacher is always the first bet, because they are the ones who can make the fastest connection for you, for whatever it is, not just with mental health.
And I think that's wonderful. I just think that we have an obligation to be proactive and to be looking at attendance records and everything else, and if there's a problem, to reach out and try to fix it and not wait for the parent to do.
See, but I do think that they're getting those, right? Like, I've talked to enough teachers that they see a student not logging in, or they see a kid still in bed attending class.
I can tell you it's not good enough.
Right, I agree with you.
So I think a strategy that I used as a principal was weekly kid chats. So I would meet with my grade level APs, and I pulled the roster of kids, and I was like, these kids are failing. Why? What's happening? This teacher has half of their classes failing. Why? What are we doing? And I think maybe implementing a different level of kind of a kid chat so that we are following up. And then it was a running roster every week. I would add the same list. I was like, this kid's been failing for 3 weeks. Why hasn't this moved? So there is some of that layer of accountability.
We'll work on that to make it more robust.
I think it needs to be systematic and intentional.
Yep.
And there needs to be follow through and regular, like a weekly thing.
Yeah.
Sounds like that's a good thing.
And communicate.
Yes. So Greg did text me. He said that they do every week they have space for 40 kids, and they're identifying the kids that aren't engaging in learning and grabbing those kids to be invited in for the next week after they collect their data. Rochelle's got her plan in the works, she said, and we'll be ready to go as soon as we come back in January.
So I'll ask my question along this line. I had others, but since we're talking about this, I had similar concerns about the Renfro and high school students who are not thriving. I realize many are, and I commend our teachers for their work to make virtual learning enriching and engaging, but recognizing that some students are not connecting well in that way. I'm just wondering, while we're not ready to say, let's go to the hybrid C model and bring every kid who would like to go back to high school or middle school back, but what about, as we develop this more robust process of identifying the children who are at risk and vulnerable, that we bring them back more than just on Wednesdays, that we bring back, and I'm talking, a very small group of kids here relative to what we were talking about before, but really identifying those kids that we identify as being at risk, and long before we are ready for hybrid C, start engaging with those kids more consistently, more days, not just 1 day a week, and then hopefully we can bring them back to a point where maybe we can get them back to being able to be successful virtual. Like, it doesn't even need to be a permanent thing, but there might be kids who just need a boost, or who need to reconnect somehow, or need to get through a difficult subject, or whatever it is. So I would like to, even if we're saying right now, we're not ready for in-person learning at Renfro and high school, I really would like to take a more surgical approach to this and
Well,
see if
that's
we
what the
can.
proposal process is about too, so don't forget, that we do have that option as well, so that, like, so let's say the high school sees this need and says, hey, we really wanna jumpstart this and start bringing kids in, you know, every morning from 9 to 11 or something like that.
Right.
That's one of the reasons we put that process in place, so we can be a little more, nimble when we have the needs like that as well, but we can certainly be more strategic about it, I think is what you're saying, is,
Yes.
like, don't wait for proposals, actually go out and push
Yes.
it, yeah.
Yes, exactly, and proactively seek out these kids, and not just wait for the parents to reach out, because some parents might not be checking, or might think, well, my kid's on the computer all day, so they must be learning. That's not necessarily the case. So just, you know, as long as it's going two ways, obviously, it's nice if parents do reach out to teachers, and that should be, you know, escalated in the proper way, but also that we are actively seeking out those students and finding a way to bring them in, however that needs to be. My other question, oh, go ahead, Jana, sorry. Forget you're on the speakerphone.
She said go ahead.
Oh, Jana said go ahead, okay. My other question is unrelated, but it's related to the survey, and I wonder if there's possibly a way to make it through spring break, because I feel like asking parents right now to commit to not going back full-time might dissuade those parents who are willing to be flexible for the winter months and say, you know what, I'm gonna give you a chance to kind of ease in to reopening the high school and Renfro, and I'm willing to be flexible for a few more months, but those same parents might not be willing to say, I'll be flexible till the end of the school year. And so I'm thinking that maybe if we make it for just more of a fixed period of time, it might actually benefit us, because we might find that there's more flexibility there. And I think also we are gonna learn a lot between now and then as we open our lower elementary schools, and as we hopefully start to open maybe the 6th grade, and then if we can work out smaller cohorts somehow, you know, 7th and 8th grade, and then as we start to bring back small groups to the high school, hopefully, then I think the landscape may have changed significantly. And so for those reasons, I just wonder if there's a way that we could possibly consider making that a shorter time.
Yeah, we certainly can. I think our thinking was that, if the landscape has changed that much, we're probably introducing a new plan anyway, and part of our plan is, when we introduce a new plan, you can change your mind. So I guess we felt like we were kind of capturing that. Like, for instance, let's say that the vaccine rollout goes just tremendously well, and it's rapid, and it's available to students and staff, and we suddenly realize, hey, there's no reason everyone can't be vaccinated who's in our school system. We may then say, all right, you know, 2 weeks after we feel like that was a reasonable time to be able to get it done, we're gonna ramp up and change our mode of operation. At that point, that's when we're opening up that learning choice survey again. That's kind of what we were picturing.
Yeah.
But, I mean, we could set a time on it. I think part of our worry was that if we just set an arbitrary date on it, nothing may have changed. But I get your point too, of maybe part of it is just the kind of the psychology of, are you committing for a huge period or a small period?
Yeah. And I feel like that's kind of maybe a good, not only is it sort of halfway, but it's also as we have gotten through the winter months. And we would hopefully have lower transmission rates then, but even so, like, I'm also thinking it may sound okay if you're in the driver's seat saying, well, I know we're probably gonna have changes, and so we're probably gonna let people have another chance, but if I'm reading this, I'm thinking this might be my only chance to get my kid priority to go back for the rest of the whole school year. And so I might be less likely to be flexible if I don't think, or I'm not guaranteed at least another chance to reevaluate things. So I just thought.
No, it's a good question. Let us revisit it, and we'll talk through it again tomorrow and see.
Because I do hope that we will have families who are flexible, and that, because that will give us a better opportunity, I think, for, you know, to structure this in such a way that we can open sooner and more safely and all that, so.
Yeah, it's a time question. I just want to observe that it's 15 after 8, we haven't yet got public comment. I assume we're gonna have quite a number. We also haven't had any discussion of the metrics and dates.
Yeah.
So I'm just gonna throw that out there. Where are we going with this conversation? Or maybe, do we have any other questions about the plan, or should we move to the
I think Jana was about to ask, James, it looks like, has a question.
We can go ahead with, if everyone's ready with the metric and date.
All of my questions got asked, except for the one, which is I'd like just a little more of a discussion about the accommodation process. I was glad to hear, that teachers are family members. I mean, we've just heard some stories of, I think, people who have lost a parent or an uncle or anything like that. It's horrendous. So, correct me if I'm wrong, we've kind of gone through the process of providing accommodations. You feel like?
For the ADA accommodation.
For the ADA accommodation.
The new process is what we'll be telling staff about tomorrow.
And it's gonna be defined as anyone who has a loved one or a family member or someone in close contact that they feel needs protecting.
So we're gonna limit it to people that reside with people at high risk, or have children that are categorized at high risk for severe illness from contracting COVID.
Okay.
So the one thing that came up in Teacher Advisory Council is, they felt like there are risks that are not part of the ADA accommodation process for a given individual, but, would be serious enough that they would hope we'd include it in that next tier of accommodation. So we're gonna look at that to see, rather than just limiting to exactly the people you live with, we're gonna look at it to see if, are there other things we would accommodate for the individual themselves that don't fall into ADA, but we would say, yeah, we get it, like, we can scoop you into this process, so we're gonna review that.
And because I think we are all in agreement that it's such an important set of stakeholders for feeling comfortable getting back in the classroom. It starts with making sure like they feel like they're being heard and their needs are being met, and I appreciate all the mitigation stuff, so.
Yep.
I want that accommodation process to be communicated well and thoroughly.
Yep.
And just because someone doesn't request an accommodation doesn't mean that they're gung-ho to get back in the classroom either.
Correct.
I think.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
All right, you wanna talk metrics and dates? Okay, so as we were going through this, we really felt like, we needed your input more on the metrics and dates conversation. So the one thing I can share is we don't feel like we can be ready to go back in person before January 19th, which is the day after MLK Day. We feel like, just given the timing of the decision, the need to get the learning choices back from parents, and then plan out whatever shuffling and then communicate that. We feel like we need to have a little bit of time to do that. So January 19th is where we feel is the earliest we could implement this hybrid B plan that we showed you here. I mentioned earlier that at most of the transmission levels that we have seen right now, I would feel comfortable moving forward with this K-5 plan because it is just so extreme in all of the different mitigation measures that we're doing. I do think there is some fear, like I pulled up the data just a minute ago, our cases in DeKalb County right now, today, of data report, are higher than they were in July. We have now reached a new maximum. And so one of the things we talk about in Teacher Advisory Council is, while it does make sense that all these mitigation measures are very strong and do control things very well, it also is a little scary to say, well, we're not gonna define any maximum at all. That's a little frightening, right? And so I think the feeling from the teachers would be, yeah, we get it, that it's pretty safe and the transmission isn't critical, but they'd feel better if there was a number, right? Like, whatever that number is, but just knowing there's a number, that if it is above this level, we're not even doing this hybrid B thing. And so I think that's part of the conversation is, where is that number, right? Like, if does the board feel like we can set a number, and if so, what is it? And, or are we comfortable saying, we don't think we need a number in this kind of a situation? And then the intersection of that with dates is, if we start setting numbers, that makes dates variable. If we're not setting numbers, it makes dates more certain, right? So for instance, if we don't have a maximum number that we have to stay under, we can say we're starting January 19th, period. If we say we are starting January 19th, but only if cases per 100,000 are below this level, or only if hospital utilization is below this percent, or whatever that metric is, then it makes, we have to come up with that plan like we talked about before of making it predictable so people can see the data moving up to it and understand, hey, if this happens in the data, this date gets postponed. Does that make sense? And so I just need your feelings there, because I don't feel like it's as much a scientific decision as like a comfort level position, or a comfort level of where are we as a community. And so that's what I would like to discuss that. And then also, and it came up quite a bit, right, about like the 612 and what is our comfort level in setting some metrics perhaps there, or setting a goal date there of when we want to try to do that next phase. And is that going, are we gonna approach that the same way, knowing we can't cohort to the same level, but we can do all those other mitigation strategies and maybe set a goal date? And then I'll throw in this last one just because based on some of the discussions happening in the world, I think we've all been surprised how quickly this vaccine process has gone. And so one of the things that came up at Teacher Advisory Council was knowing that vaccines are on the horizon, but not knowing how quickly, what role does that play? And they agreed it should not necessarily play a role in this first phase, right? That this we can do, it's not dependent on vaccines being available, but we might want to consider saying, before we go to this next phase, we want to see vaccines widely available, or widely available maybe to teachers or something like that. So I would be curious, just because that's one of those topics that has just really come up very recently. I'd also be curious in your thoughts on that. So just to put it in perspective, right now, if you look at DeKalb County, based off date of report, we are at 365 cases per 100,000.
For more perspective, can you give us a sense? So I struggle with being sort of, we're one of 10 systems in the state of Georgia that are not currently in schools in the state. I know that New York City closed down schools and then decided to reverse course, and they're back in school. I think you mentioned that the other day. And so basically, we have a lot of experience with schools being in. As we said, our mitigation strategies are sort of bionic, right? Like we've got the best mitigation you're gonna find. We just heard that we don't have any example of a system that has imposed this strict cohorting strategy as a condition of returning. So we have schools all over the state and the nation, all of whom have these very high levels of community spread, I mean, not all of them, but a lot of them, that have successfully returned without seeing in-school transmission. And so I think we need, when we talk about these numbers and even these mitigation strategies, we need to keep that in context, that what we're doing is, there's a balance between the student health, mental health, and well-being, and staff safety. We need to protect the staff. We need to keep them safe. Evidence is we can keep them safe. We've kind of pulled the dial to say if there's any risk at all, it's too much, and instead we're going to risk the students to protect the staff. And I guess I wonder if we can't find more balance so that we can actually do our jobs as a school system and educate the kids too. And I feel like we're setting metrics that ensure that we don't go back. And I don't feel good about that. I mean, I feel like I don't feel good about it.
So based on that, would you be proponent of saying, yes, this phase, we're good, move forward, we don't need to worry about the maximum, because we kind of know where we are at this point, and maybe move towards the 6-12 phases sooner rather than later, right? Like, make that follow fairly quickly after.
I mean, you're asking me, my position is absolutely yes. And it's not sort of damn the torpedoes, we're gonna do it no matter what. It's, let's do it. Let's get in class, and then let's monitor very closely to see how it goes. And the second, the instant that there is a cluster of cases that you have in-school transmission, that's when you pull back immediately. I mean, so we do every mitigation that we can find. And then we go back and get in school. And it's not that we're gonna do it no matter what or until some date. We're gonna see how it goes. If there's a problem, we're gonna adjust. It's just that we're gonna make our decisions based on what we see and experience and how it goes, instead of, because there's a number. And the problem is that we can't correlate the number with the actual risk, and therefore it's arbitrary inherently. And I understand that it's important for, that it gives comfort. But I think the cost might be too high. And I think that the alternative of just being very, very on top of the situation and being very responsive, I think should give an equal measure of protection and comfort, I think, if we do it well and communicate the cases transparently. And I mean, while I'm on it, I just think that, if we've got this I mean, I feel like I wish I could give you, this charge that said, go figure it out. So let's cohort to the maximum extent that we can. But let's not insist that first 15-person cohorts is the only way that we're going to get back into school. Like, the virus, I mean, the vaccine. If we wait for a vaccine, we've written off the school year. Because even teachers aren't very much in the front line. I think they should be, but they're not. So if we wait for that, we're just writing off the school year. Is there not a way that we can get kids in school who want to be there and put a plexiglass wall with its own ventilation system? I mean, I guess I'm saying, don't, so that teacher doesn't interact with the kids, so that teacher, and put plexiglass walls in the school to separate those in, I don't know. And if you can't do it perfectly, I still think we have to say, it's kind of like we've got a menu of all these different protective measures. This is one. And the fact that we don't, we still got 6 layers of cheese, right? And so is the cost of insisting on that 7th layer of cheese, the kids don't go back to school. Because if it is, I think that might be too high.
Okay.
That's my sense.
That's all, thank you.
Hey, I want to push back a couple of places. One, it's very important for me to say that you said that, and they're all doing it successfully, was the second sentence out of your mouth. And sat in GSBA conference last week, and at one point he said, how many of you have had calls for your superintendent to be fired this week? And we were 42 for 42 for the people in the Zoom call. How many of you have shut down because of COVID? And and it was 42 for 42. And we don't hear about these other schools, and I've shared this publicly, like, they're out for the 9th week of the school year, and he's a senior, and thankfully he got into Georgia Tech. Congratulations, AJ. But like, they're not doing it successfully. I want to back up on that narrative very strongly. I think part of what is amazing and part of why we've been okay is that virtual has failed some kids, but our teachers and our staff and the approaches has been good. It hasn't been great. It hasn't been good for everybody with that. Second is to work within the analogy is that the Swiss cheese model works unless it's a deluge pouring against the Swiss cheese. And I think even the analogy requires an upper level of risk because, and I thought that Metric A and the scientists in that group and the ones that followed back up with us were amazing that the only slight pushback, Louis, because I want the kids in school too, And I think it's absolutely amazing, and we know we are risking things. And people think that I disagree with you. I agree with you on so many things. Is that the notion of monitoring and see how it goes? Maybe someone dying, maybe a kid dying, maybe this disease that we don't know that's popping out. And I just want to make sure that I'm more comfortable if we give more people choice. So that's why the one question I wanted we to make sure that we had was the accommodations of teachers. I don't want anyone to feel like they have to show up. Like, the service industry can open up if they want to. The ones I feel bad are the workers who have to go for their livelihood. And so there's a teacher that has to go into a classroom full of first grade kids who are acting a fool and can't keep their mask on, and is putting his life on the line so that we can monitor to figure it out. I'm not comfortable with that, but I'm also not comfortable with continuing to fail our kids. And it's not two sides of the same thing. We need to get over that. Like, we're looking, and I love that Dr. Furman's presentation began with the mission statement, because that's it. We exist to provide kids with high quality education, and it needs to be multifaceted. We need to continue to focus on mental health, because we know we're failing. We need to continue to improve virtual, because we know it's a component of it completely. But part of me says to not say, there was some pushback in the New York City schools. That was the other thing that I wrote down that I wanted to say. They were at 3%, and then they started to go over, and Dr. Fauci went and said, listen, I'm not sure that closing is good, and they reversed course. We're at, what, like 7.8, 7.9% on the positivity test rate, and it's gone up for the fourth or fifth time. That scares the hell out of me, having lost family members, but that's emotional. But then are the teachers going to be able to respond to that? If choice is built in, I'm more comfortable. If we're combating mental health and giving people the opportunities and reaching out, I'm more comfortable. But even within, we've got a report from some of the most qualified doctors in the world, putting their names and reputations on the line, saying, if it gets above here, it's not that schools spread the risk, it's that we would expect about 2 teachers to be positive when they come into the building every week, and then that creates the spread and the risk. So maybe just put a cap on it here. It also creates some predictability for families. I mean, that was the big problem with our plan, is that this plan could have been put in place in June. We should have been rolling with this. We may have gotten 6, 7, 8 weeks of in-person already. But then the predictability is so people don't feel like you're flip-flopping, but they feel like, now I'm rambling. Metrics are arbitrary. They also provide a safety net for people and planning, particularly when the other side is life and monitoring and hospital beds. I mean, one of the metrics we're considering is, are there empty ER beds in a hospital for our teachers to take advantage of if they come down to it? Holy crap. I'm not qualified to make that decision. I'm not comfortable making that decision. And that's it. That's the best way I'm going to say that.
Fine. I mean, I don't disagree.
Yeah.
I mean, there might be a different emphasis. And,
Right.
I mean, metrics are not always arbitrary. The best metrics are actually tied to actual risk, and we know how we derive them.
Right.
And we can say that if this experience shows this is no longer safe. When I say they're arbitrary, what I'm saying is that that's not how these particular proposed metrics were derived. I mean, if we're at maximum capacity in hospital beds, I'm with you. There's a point at which it's just not safe. I mean, I'm not nuts about it. I'm saying that we don't tie ourselves to metrics as decision points when they are arbitrary and aren't tied, and this goes back to the other point, I won't keep talking, but I mean, granted, schools opening and closing, I don't see that necessarily as a failure. I mean, we don't want to yo-yo.
No.
But what I'm saying is that the overwhelming experience, as I understand it, is that schools aren't super spreaders. And so schools are in fact opening and operating and have not been the source of outbreaks. And if I'm wrong, then I'm wrong, and I would like to know that, and I'd like to correct course. But that's my understanding to date, and that's the understanding, mainly what made the most impression on me is the ABC Science Collaborative data, looking at the actual experience of schools across the state of North Carolina, because that's where they are, and finding that the very few schools that experienced clusters were those that had very poor mitigation strategies. I mean, they didn't have a Decatur strategy. They didn't have any. They weren't even requiring math.
Totally.
And so the experience, what I'm saying is that we've got schools that are open all over the land with much worse mitigation than we have. And yet they're doing it safely. And again, it's a balance. We are risking and experimenting with the lives of these young people who are being subjected to this unprecedented, we don't know what's going to do to them.
No.
So it's a balance. I mean, I agree with you. A little bit of a different emphasis, and I'll shut up.
I'll jump in. I think we need metrics. We're following CDC guidance in terms of reopening schools. The CDC is saying that pre-K, K through 5, or maybe pre-K through 5th grade can reopen safely, although I question reopening now when the cases in DeKalb County are 365 cases per 100,000. And the CDC guidance, in their rubric says, at 200, you're at the highest risk. That's where their rubric ends, at 200. And we're at 365. And so I just cannot rationalize putting teachers and students back in the building when the numbers are this high. And I think that, we aren't ensuring failure. We're trying to make sure that students are safe while, making sure that they get the best possible education considering this situation that we have no control over. We're an IB district, and so our teachers have to use rubrics. That's how teachers determine, where students are at. And I don't know how then as a district, we not use a rubric to determine when it's safe for us to go back. James brought up, the successfully comment in terms of schools all over reopening, but those schools are still having cases. And so, I don't know how we define successful, but I mentioned during our work session that recently a nurse in Paulding County died. The school had not acknowledged doing any contact tracing, so we don't know for sure. But when I said that, a parent emailed and said, she was 70, and as if that justified her death. And I just don't want to be responsible for anybody's major illness or extended complications as a result of this virus, and certainly not somebody's death. And it feels like, that is what we are potentially taking responsibility for if we return now when the number of cases and infection rate is so incredibly high. There was a parent in the email that said, there's no shame in failing, only shame in not trying. But what would that failure potentially look like? And so, the Swiss cheese graphic made it seem like those mitigation strategies are foolproof when they're not. They just reduce risk. They don't eliminate it. And so I think that we need to take metrics and have numbers that indicate when it's safe to reopen and when it's too dangerous and we must close or remain closed. That's it.
Dana, where would those numbers be for you?
So, I will go with the CDC guidance, no higher than 200. I mean, even at the work session, you mentioned that you thought that the Metrics B report, that those folks would be comfortable at 200. 200 is still high. I mean, what in the CDC's rubrics is 50 to 200 per 100,000. So 200 is still high, but I definitely I couldn't go beyond 200, beyond what the CDC recommends.
Thank you.
Tasha, if you wanna go, I'll chime in whenever, but.
I agree that I think there needs to be some kind of metric. I just think it would be irresponsible, for us to just say January 19th, and what if the numbers are 400 on January 19th? And I think trying to see if this hybrid will work at the height and peak of this, virus is irresponsible. So, I don't know if there's maybe a number I'm looking for, but maybe I'm looking for the numbers coming down, steadily.
Like a trend or something.
A trend. And you were using those metrics back in October,
Yep.
and when you gave that presentation then, that spoke to me, because the trend is really, I think, what's very important. I like the hybrid B model, and, I think we watch, the first month and see how it goes, and then I agree with Heather in really getting to the core of some of those students in high school and middle school that need to get back sooner than later. I am a little bit bothered by some of the emails that I see that says we've reached out to our mental team, we reached out to our principal, we reached out to the board and Dr. Duty, and I've heard nothing. And so I really would like us to beef up how parents can let us know right away, and it's being addressed right away, because that's the part for me that I want to make sure that we are a top school, and that should be something that is top for us, that our parents are heard, listened to, validated, and addressed, even if that means we say it'll be 3 weeks, but at least they've heard from us. And they know that we are actively trying to get their child somewhere. I would love for that number of parents who feel like they've never even been responded back to be as close to zero as possible. And I know that's hard. That's a big goal, but I would love that to be a goal for us. And Heather, man, I do this all the time. I should have wrote it down. It was something that James said.
Do you want me to jump in and it'll probably pop in your head? Oh, there you go, see?
And just basically continuing to, the board and all of us continuing to stress to the community that we are more on the same page than not. We are absolutely more on the same page than we're not. And so, this is where we all want our kids to go back to school. We all want our kids to go back to school and be safe. Where the perspectives differ is how to do that. But we don't differ in what we want to provide for the children in our school system. And I think that when we get emails that say, well, we don't want you as a board to be pressured by the minority voices. We don't want you to be pressured by the small few that think this way, or the small few that are fearful, or the small few that want to go back to school. There is no small few. I really want to make that abundantly clear. There is no small few. If I could print up all of the emails that we receive and put one perspective here and one perspective here, they would be the same. I promise you that. And so that just needs to be said over and over again, so that you know that the decisions that we are making, first and foremost with the students in mind, is also bombarded with both sides having a very strong voice, a very strong presence, and we have to listen to all of that. We have to take in all of that. And there is no small minority voice in this argument. And so everyone's position and perspective gets the same weight and is important. No one voice is less important because there's only a few of them, because there isn't only a few of them. So, and it's the same for our voice here. We are very much on the same page in many things, and working out the details on how to provide quality education to our students is the same exact goal that we on the board have, and I believe that David's team have, and essentially that parents have. We just have got to get to the point where we can somehow agree on how that looks, and that we're not gonna get everything that we want on our list. If you have a list of 5 things that you really want, you're not gonna get all 5. But hopefully we can get to that point where we can come to an agreement on how that looks. And so I think we're there, and we're just going to have to, like you said, we'll make a decision, we'll stick with it, we'll stand by it, and we'll keep going.
Can I ask you one more question? Do you, with the downward trend thing,
Mhm.
are there still maximums that you feel like even with a downward trend, you wouldn't feel comfortable saying, we're going back? Or is it the trend that's most critical?
I would echo Jana in saying that the CDC has given us some of those numbers.
Yeah, like the
And-
200, for instance.
Right.
None of their things go beyond 200.
Exactly.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Well, I will say, like, I think it's important to realize that there is a balance. And we are trying really hard, all of us, to strike that balance. In this case, I feel like we have very, very heavily weighted and done an extremely thorough, I can't think of any school system that may have done as thorough a job of analyzing the situation. And what's proposed for the K through 5, I'm gonna talk about that first, is a very cautious, partial opening. It's far from a full face-to-face opening. It is a partial day. We've eliminated the lunch period. We have all the mitigation strategies that are well thought through, and small cohorts. I think it's an extremely well thought out plan, and I feel like to say that this is an experiment is wrong. Like, we are not the first school to go back, and I think we have seen that schools are able to do this, and that the positivity rates in the schools has been showed to be significantly lower than the community spread. And frankly, it may be safer for these kids in this structured environment to be there. So I am concerned about setting a number because, first of all, I don't know how this board could just pick a number. We're less qualified than the committee who's been studying this for, a month, and so, and I'm concerned that if we said 200, well, we're above that now. I don't know when we'll be below that. I am concerned that would mean we're not going back to school, and I feel like that's too far the other way. And so I do think the metrics are important to watch so that we know, and that instead of saying it's a back to school or not, it's a when cases are above the numbers that are extremely high, we must implement all of our implementations with fidelity, including keeping the class sizes small and not go to any further larger opening. And so we sort of maintain that very careful partial reopening that we have just discussed. And in doing so, I do feel comfortable saying that we can go back January 19th because that plan is so extremely cautious. And I also think that metrics that we have proposed, and we have a dashboard, will be very transparent, and that we will react quickly to any situations we have in the school. And because of the well thought out plan, we will also have very small cohorts, and we'll be able to be very thoughtful about how we handle those situations, and also, to James's point, to minimize, we don't want to have a lot of, interruption in the consistency in our learning. So I think that the plan that has been presented and agreed to by the Teacher Advisory Committee is extremely conservative and based on science and well thought through, and I feel comfortable with it. I feel comfortable that it can do what we need to do to keep our schools safe. So I am comfortable with that, and I'm not saying that I don't want to pay attention to the metrics, because I do, but I think they should serve as an indicator for how cautious and how whether we are implementing our mitigation strategies to do the 100% mark. And then as those numbers go way down, we can start to, perhaps with the committee's recommendations, maybe alleviate some of those stricter protocol, maybe increase the cohort size, or, bring more kids back. So for the K through 5, I think that, I feel very comfortable with that plan. And at this point, we're not talking about bringing back RMS, Renfro, and DHS. But like I said, I really would like for us to do more for the kids who are at risk and who are most vulnerable students. And so I'm thinking too there that we should move toward again, it can be very cautious and start small, but focus on those students first and start bringing them back. I don't want to tie anything to a vaccine, because from what I'm hearing, that's not going to be available to the mass population until mid-summer, which to me sounds like that's August. So, I love that that's on the horizon, but I don't want to tie anything directly to that. And again, I think this is such a fluid situation. I think we're going to know a whole lot more in a very short period of time. And so I'm also hesitant to pick a number, which is somewhat arbitrary, to then be fixed with that number, because I think it will reduce our ability to make logical decisions based upon what we're seeing. And I hope that what we focus on the most is the metrics in our schools and how successful we are with this very well thought out plan that we have.
Thank you. James, I think I forgot to ask you about a number, if you had one in mind.
Oh,
I forgot to write it down.
Oh, I thought Metric A is fantastic.
Okay.
I mean, that group is incredibly qualified. They did the math on what that means for the number of staff that would be in our system, why that number of staff would make it impossible to operate. Broke it down with the bullet, I mean.
What was the number that they gave in that report?
They said anything over 200 per 100,000 in DeKalb County would just logistically makes it difficult to not expect a teacher to come into the building and test positive, and that it wasn't a question of whether I think schools do not necessarily spread, but that's where you have the event, and then below that, it's probably good.
Thank you.
So there's only one point that I want to make, which is to clarify, for the sake of the public, the CDC hasn't recommended the number, and so there is no CDC recommendation. The CDC has indicated, and it's correct, that the highest indicator, I think, tops out at 200. They just don't say what happens above. They also don't say how to interpret their indicators. And so the way that I would interpret the indicators would be similar to what Heather described, I think, which is you look at these things, this is your dashboard, these things tell you that there is a high risk, and so we need to be very, very, very careful, which means all of your mitigations need to be in place. If you read the CDC materials, you're left scratching your head, what do I do with these things? And so I just want to make clear that there is no CDC recommendation on the point. That's what we're doing here.
Right. They just say at 50 to 200, you're at the highest risk for transmission. That's
correct.
Right. Not just high risk. They do quantify it by levels: low risk, lowest risk, low risk, high risk, highest risk. And so at 200, you're at the highest risk, and we're at 346.
That's correct. It's what they leave open, and the point I was making is what you do with that information. And so the response to highest risk could be to shut down, or it could be to go to the next level of mitigation. And so what the CDC doesn't do is to tell us, with a given suite or menu of mitigations in place, is it safe to be in school at the highest risk? That's not, the CDC just simply hasn't spoken to that issue.
And if anything, some of the leaders at the CDC have sent messages that having schools open is not spreading, you know, and
Dr. Fauci himself
has said that, and Metric B, the group did good, and they did valuable work, I think, there, that said that in lots of places where schools have been open versus closed, the spread rate is the same, so there's nothing to conclude beyond that. But even within Metric B, I think we're all, like, opening and close and start to take care of that. I think that there is, all I'm suggesting is that there is an upper limit where we feel safe. And what I really wanted to reach out to Dr. Fauci through the TV the other day is, like, he was talking to the city of New York, who wanted to shut down when it dropped from 1.8 to 3. I'm like, we're in a community where we jumped from 6 to 7.5, you know, literally twice as likely. I'm okay with erring towards opening, given the safety measures, given the mitigation and that sort of stuff, but.
I want to reiterate, or just explain for people who don't know, this is not a vote. The
No.
school board is
Well,
not.
that's what I wanted to clarify. I want to make sure you're still in the position of you're comfortable with us taking what we just heard and making that into a plan, or have you changed the position and you do want to say, hey, we need to
No, I think
vote on
we
this?
need to, and for the sake of those listening, one reason that I at least have felt free to be frank is that I think it's important for you to get a kind of a full dose of the various perspectives in the room. I feel strongly about this, but it's a full decision, and we're going to make a better decision collectively than alone.
Yep.
So we delegated this decision to you.
Yep, perfect. All right.
I just need clarification on something. In terms of the plan, we're saying we're okay with it without metrics? What are we saying that we're okay
What I
with?
was clarifying is that what we need to do now is the administrative team needs to go back and rediscuss metrics and dates and things based on everything we just heard from the board in terms of your perspectives, because I do want to communicate something with when we put out communications tomorrow. I want to communicate a position on metrics and dates to the community, and I just wanted clarification of whether the board wanted to make that decision or we would interpret from what we heard and we'll make a decision like the last direction we're going.
Okay.
So, public comment. So my apologies to those waiting for the comment period. It's 9 o'clock. We'll be here as long as it goes. If you haven't yet signed up, do so. And I guess let's open it up.
Dana?
Okay. So the first person for public comment is Chuck Daniels. You should be able to speak now, Chuck.
Oh, Shana, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. Thank you for the time. I have two sons at DHS, a junior and a freshman. The junior's doing great virtually. The freshman is struggling. Much of today's meeting had nothing to do with me. So I'll apologize if I focus on something very personal. So we're gonna have to make a change. My freshman's gonna have to go to school somewhere else because there's obviously nothing in the future where he's gonna be going back to in-person. So I would just ask the board and Dr. Duty, my junior would like to finish his schooling in Decatur. So likely we'll have to move to help my freshmen. If there could be a reinstitution of the tuition program, maybe a reduced tuition program, so that my junior can finish out his schooling at CSD, that would be much appreciated. This is heartbreaking to me. My wife and I have lived in the city of Decatur for 21 years, and we're gonna have to move. I hate it. So with my remaining time, I heard Dr. Duty talk about reaching out to teachers when your student is struggling. I'm gonna share a little real world situation of what that's like for a student struggling. My friend, we reached out to his teacher. Well, actually, I asked him to reach out to his teacher in September about some missing assignments. She didn't respond. I told him to reach out to her again after a couple of days. She didn't respond. I reached out to her. She didn't respond. So we had our tutor that we had to hire, who used to teach with this teacher, reach out to her. She didn't respond. I reached out to one vice principal at the high school. He didn't respond. I reached out to him again. I ended up hearing from a different vice principal who told me the teacher would reach out to me and my son. Never heard from the teacher. Reached out to the vice principal again today. Apparently I'm supposed to hear from the teacher. I haven't heard. So if you think that our kids are getting educated that are struggling, you're wrong. There are real kids suffering out there, and we have to make life-changing decisions to move because of it. I'll finish because I was frustrated. I heard several board members say, I don't want to be responsible. I don't want to be responsible for this. I don't want to be responsible for that. If you don't want to be responsible, don't take a leadership position. We need you to lead. Thank you for the time.
Thank you, Mr. Dan. Next up is Christy Campbell. Ms. Campbell, can you hear?
Hi there, can everyone hear me? I hope. Christy Campbell, and we have 3 children, 11th grader, 9th grader, and a 3rd grader. And much like Chuck, we are struggling. We had to make the unfortunate decision to pull our 3rd grader from the city schools due to virtual school. We had to put him in a private school where he could get physical, one-on-one personal attention in face-to-face environment. He was dyslexic, he has an IEP. You're talking about these students that are struggling and to be supporting them. So we made that decision for him, but my 2 high schoolers are stuck in a virtual environment that is not working for them. And it's easy for you as a board member to say that we just need to help those students that are struggling. But us parents are reaching out to the schools saying, our students are struggling. I have spoken to the school counselor multiple times. But if the students aren't willing to bite, there's nothing else you can do. They're high school students and they want to be in school. They miss the socialization. Not to mention the IB program for a junior is a rigorous course. My 11th grader has 7 college courses. 7. That is what the city schools of Decatur are about. We are an IB program. We moved to Decatur for the school system. And now you are epically failing our children. I work in healthcare. I'm an essential worker. I've been going to work in person. And you know what? It was scary at first, but you have to do your job. The virus is not going to go away. We have to figure out a way to live with it, to work with it. You can put all these metrics out there. They're going to trend up. They're going to trend down. That's how it is. It was a novel virus. It will never go away. So to say that we need certain numbers, we may never see those numbers again. It might be months. It could be years. Time will tell, but we still owe it to our children to get them in school. Those that want that choice should have that choice. We've talked about choice over and over again. It should be our choice. If our children are struggling, the only way you can give us that choice is to open up the schools for 6th through 12th grade. You're doing such an injustice for all of the city of Decatur parents and families by keeping these kids at home even longer if they don't want to be. I just can't even imagine what we have been doing since March. There are, like you've all said, thousands of students in-person school if they wanted to be, and it is working for them. Public schools, private schools, you name it. It is absurd to be only one of 10 school systems in the state. And I love the teachers. I love the teachers, but they need to teach in person if our children want it. And I guess with that, I'll leave you with the next family that is gonna talk.
Thank you, Ms. Campbell. Next up is Nicole Gregor. Mr. Gorgas, can you hear us?
Hi, I can hear you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Hi, I am a parent of a Glenwood and a Tally student. And I wanted to ask you how the pods are going to go ahead and still continue to increase. I understood from last week that there are 45 new pod facilitators. And Dr. Duty was boasting how they would continue to ramp up. I'd like to encourage you to compare the number of children that are currently in city-supported pods, the updated number of children that will be in city-supported pods after the addition of 45 new pod facilitators. I'd like you to think about that and compare it to the number of children that would have returned virtually in early November. And you'll probably have updated numbers very soon of those that will want to return virtually, return in person. And I'd like you to think about the numbers as if all children were there in person. Running these numbers in a school-centric and then an aggregate would be ideal, to look at it from a holistic point of view. And I look forward to learning more about how these pods will continue to increase and serve those children and those families. And how would it be if we just opened the schools and said, thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Ms. Kanika Sam. Ms. Sam, can you hear us?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, hi, this is Kanika Sims. I have 2 children in the City Schools of Decatur. I wanted to touch on, I have a concern about the policy that was discussed regarding when families can choose to go between virtual and back in person versus in person, back to virtual, et cetera. And that the selection will be valid through the end of the year, whatever selection is made. And so I just want us to put on an equity lens and look at this. If we were to do this policy that says once your selection is made, it's valid through the end of the year, this policy is demonstrating a complete lack of awareness of how COVID is disproportionately devastating communities of color and how that devastation will impact our decision-making as people of color. Black families are more likely to have comorbidities and intergenerational family structures that makes COVID particularly deadly for Black families. I don't know if you guys are aware, but the CDC put out a report and it showed that although 32 of the residents in Atlanta are Black, 79% of the patients hospitalized with COVID in Metro Atlanta hospitals between March and April, there were 79% of those patients were Black out of a population of 32%. 13% of those patients were white. And so when there's this consideration about whether or not schools are safe, the consideration is very different whether you're a family of color and whether you're a white family. And I would just say there's lots of data that shows that African-American families are less likely to return to school due to higher risk. And so it's really disappointing from an equity perspective. And also when you look at the increasing achievement gap that we'll have by limiting access, if we say that once families choose that they cannot later decide that they want to also engage in face-to-face learning. So I would just say that if CSD is committed to meeting the needs of all of the children and families within the community and not a select few, they will provide families with additional options to switch from virtual to in-person at a 6-week mark, 9-week mark, or a mid-semester mark. They will definitely take into consideration that your families of color are, this virus means different things to your families of color, the achievement gap, all of those things we have to take in consideration, very different things. And we may not be the first ones to jump back into the schools when they do open, but we should absolutely be given an opportunity to make that choice to return at a later date. Thank you.
Next up is Ms. Anastasia Diabolisi. I'm not finding Ms. Anastasia Diabolisi. So we're gonna move on to Mark Bagianda. I see it, April. April,
Yes, thank you.
you're welcome.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for your patience. Mark Biagioni. I have 3 kids in the City Schools of Decatur, pre-K, 2nd and 5th grade. And I'm also a public health planner and project manager by training. And I've been watching this whole challenge unfold both from a professional and a parent standpoint. And the advice or the viewpoint I have that I want to offer tonight is looking at 3 things for the City Schools of Decatur that I feel are unique to us. One is the modeling of the transmission that's going to continue to happen after the holidays and the fact that we're in DeKalb County, which is a high rate of transmission. 2, the likelihood that a vaccine or vaccines will be available to adults in the spring. And 3 is we're entering this in somewhat of a position of strength as a well-resourced and privileged community. Based on those 3 factors, here are the 2 points I want to make. One is City Schools of Decatur is an amazing organization. And what I worry about is not only what happens in the spring, but what the organization looks like when this is all over. As you all know, any organization's greatest assets are its staff, its teachers, and its administrators. It's what builds the culture and delivers on what we want to see for our kids. While the schools are here to serve our students, if we don't listen to our teachers' concerns along the way, we'll have massive long-term issues in the years to come. Second, I know many of the senior CDC scientists that worked on Metrics 1A really believe what they put forward. And I urge you guys to strongly consider that recommendation and make sure that your staff are 100% on board before moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is James. Petey.
Good job, honey.
Yes, I'm here.
That was incredible.
All right, first, before I begin,
That was awesome, Mark. Give Mark some love tonight.
Can you hear me now? Before I begin, I'd like to take 30 seconds of silence to acknowledge all the teachers, bus drivers, lunch workers, school nurses, and custodians across the country who have been sickened or died from COVID-19. I'm a parent of a CSD student and a CSD employee and a CSD city resident. We've all heard community members, CSD administrators, and board members speak about the mental health of our students, about their emotional well-being during virtual learning. In his recent CNN interview, Dr. Duty mentioned that behavioral health has been the focus of our district before the pandemic. He also commented that we need to invest in more resources after we return in person. But why wait until we return in person? If the social emotional piece is such a concern, why were the C lessons stopped on October 28th after completing only 2 out of the 7 units? These concepts that have been learned in these lessons I have referenced in my classes with my students. And Maggie Furman mentioned the emotional learning will be taught during morning meetings when we return. But when will CSD be proactive instead of reactive? The social emotional learning should be intentional and purposeful, not just incidental. When will the additional units be taught? Who is the person at Wilson Center that will make this happen and make it a priority, whether we return in person or not anytime soon? And I want to close with, when I was first hired in CSD, when I was buying ice cream on a Saturday, when I ran into the associate superintendent, she proceeded to introduce me to her parents and then told them which school I worked at and my position there. I was impressed and honored. In recent public comments, Dr. Duty has stated that teachers want to return to the classroom, but neither he nor my TAC representative have asked for my opinion since August. Unfortunately, we have lost that small town atmosphere. Thank you.
Next up is Dan Baskerville. Dan?
Yes, good evening. So I was, after I heard the presentation by Dr. Duty and Maggie Furman tonight, I was like, wow, this seems to be they've done a good job on this plan, really made it more concrete since I listened to the board session last week. So maybe I don't really need to make any comments at all. But after hearing some comments from a couple of the board members about not going back without, metrics being a consideration, I felt I still need to say something. So since I have a 7th grader at Renfro, I'm just really going to speak from a perspective for 6 to 8 and not comment on K to 5 or high school, since, that's, not where my kid goes. I understand and to an extent agree with the metrics subcommittee report B regarding the difficulty with having specific metrics. However, they also specifically state they are not advocating for a full return to in-person schooling when risk levels are judged to be intolerably high. Can you not go back to the subcommittee and ask them to come up with a definition of what is intolerably high? Most importantly, though, whether you support report A or report B, neither of them support going back to full-time face-to-face at these current levels. So to go back without any metrics at any time, to me, would appear to ignore these experts who put all this time and would be at the very least irresponsible. I mean, why did we even ask them to do this if their recommendations are going to totally be ignored, which I believe several board members are not ignoring at all. It is very clear to me that currently, and unfortunately, probably for the next couple of months, we will be dealing with risk levels that are intolerably high. So if you cannot comfortably cohort in 6 to 8, and I trust staff's analysis on this, that you really can't, we should not be trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. What is worth working on is what I've heard mentioned here by a couple members is for face-to-face for students with the greatest need, as the lesser number should also allow for acceptable cohorting. So certainly let's try to help these students in a face-to-face setting. Also, it's not just as simple as letting those who want face-to-face to go back no matter what the level of transmission and letting others have the option to stay virtual. First, there are the teachers who may not feel safe going back at these high levels that would if it was more moderate. Second, if those who stay virtual would get new teachers in this scenario, you are asking those families to choose between virtual with new teachers or returning with a transmission rate and mitigation measures they are not comfortable with. So while you may satisfy those who want face-to-face, no matter what the metrics, it will be to the detriment of many, if not the majority of families, who have to choose between safety and the significant disruption of having to change teachers in the middle of the year. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next up is Derek Peasy.
Hi, before I begin my comments, I will take 30 seconds to honor the teachers, custodians, cafeteria workers, bus drivers, and education professionals who have been sickened or died from COVID-19 across our country. Now, there's so much cow dung being flung right now by Mr. Jones and Ms. Tell, it's simply impossible to pick a place to start. Ms. Tell, I'm sure you're a wonderful real estate agent, but despite your protestations, you are not a scientist. In real estate, you can get away with feeling for a price, you know, see what the market will bear. But with lives, you have to pick a number. Mr. Jones, you know the saying in law, if the facts are on your side, pound the facts. If the law is on your side, pound the law. And if you don't have either, pound the table. Well, all I've heard you do in these last 3 meetings is pound the table. And I believe the English put it best when they said that people like you can pound sand. Now, according to the CSD COVID dashboard, there are 2 students at Winona Park who contracted COVID in our community. Now, I'm unclear as to the number of students in pods at Winona Park. I've heard it's 22 or 17. Either way, that means that somewhere between 9 and 11% of the current pod students at that one sample school have been exposed to COVID in the community. Not at school, but in the community. I get that. But they brought that into the school during what is known as the mismatch period before testing positive for COVID. That's how high the community infection rate is as of 3 weeks ago. So high that between 9 and 11% of the students in that one sample school have been exposed to COVID, that you know of. And it's much higher now. In fact, I've seen some estimates show that we could be as high as 500 cases per 100,000 by early January. Now, Winona Park is but one example. And in fact, many of the other schools in our system actually have a higher rate of COVID positive students. You can cheerlead your mitigation plan all you want, but you can't mitigate what you cannot see, or the cases you do not know about.
Thank you, Mr. Peasy. Next up is Jessica Brown. Ms. Brown, can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, yes, this is Dr. Brown. I'd like to commend Dr. Duty and the CSPC. As a member, I can say that things aren't always easy, particularly with a novel virus, particularly when the data are widely differential in methodology and generalizability. However, there are some decisions that are clearly wrong. And I'd like to point out some board comments before I get to those. Mr. Herndon, I take great offense that you called a first grader acting a fool. That's offensive and frankly shows your ignorance of both children and of the data that is available. The only correct thing you said is I am rambling and that you're not qualified to make this decision. Mr. Jones and Ms. Tell, you clearly have read the literature and you have a grasp on the science. As an infectious disease epidemiologist, I commend you on that.
Ms. Brown?
Yes.
I appreciate it. You need to refrain from insulting board members. We're just not going to tolerate it.
I'll continue. Given the 6 to 12 plan, there are some significant gaps in this plan. I certainly hope that you will survey the students to see how many will opt in, because the need more time to plan line is no longer acceptable. I have a child with multiple special needs, an extensive IEP, and not only is the district non-compliant, no one has reached out to me to tell me about high need in-person options available. I would ask that you quit waiting for schools to tell you and tell parents if you have an option that their kids may qualify for or need. Our 6 to 12 students are at the highest risk of mental health diagnosis, as well as the most likely to be unsupervised, particularly those of us who are not from economically privileged households. This plan still leaves a gap for our IEP students that has been grossly unaddressed by this board, and I certainly hope that we're all reading up on FAPE. I would strongly encourage you to commit to minimally providing pods for all families in need by January, including specially facilitated pods for our students with IEPs. Lastly, I'd like to task you, once our students are back, to begin to plan how we as a district serve our IEP students and make up for services that may have been missed or inconsistently implemented. I have my 6th grader here with me who's prepared a statement for us.
Hi, I'm a 6th grader and I would just like to say that I wish you would ask us, the kids, what we need, because some of us are really struggling with virtual, getting help from our school. We need to go back to school because we need to feel connected with our other friends, and also we need help with our learning because we're not getting the help we need. And I feel that you guys should know this. This is affecting us too.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Before we proceed, I'd like to remind our commenters that under our rules, comments during this comment period need to be addressed to the board as a body and not to individual members. And so we've let some of this pass, but I won't anymore. And so if you can't respect that rule, we will shut it off. So please just try to keep it to the board as a body. I understand that everyone's passionate, and that's fine, and frankly, I can take it, but it's just not appropriate. So let's continue.
In Dr. Brown's defense, I don't think she was calling me a fool. I think she was quoting me earlier when I said that 1st graders will sometimes act a fool. She said that was offensive.
I did not understand that, and I apologize.
That's what I gathered. She said because having taught, I did my teaching in a 1st grade classroom, so I did have very vivid memories of what I described as 1st graders acting a fool in a classroom. I'll stand by that. It's probably not a public forum as a best.
I understand. And then I'll apologize to Ms. Brown for misunderstanding. However, the rules stand, and
I agree
avoid
with
these misunderstandings, if people will address their comments to the board as a body.
Yeah.
Okay?
Next up is Mr. Fanta Cowan. Fanta?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, first I wanted to thank the board for all of their hard work and going back and reconsidering all of the teachers' wishes and the parents' wishes, and I understand that's a lot to juggle. I can tell that, at least from what I can see, some of the concerns of the teachers are trying to be met here, and some of the concerns of the parents are trying to be met. And I can appreciate that, so I just wanted to say thank you for that. In regards to the metrics, that's really what I wanted to comment on. I think that if we don't have metrics, we're going to find ourselves in a situation like we did when the board initially said that everybody was going to be coming back face to face. And there were a lot of parents upset. And one of the reasons why parents were upset was because there wasn't a lot of clarity as to how you all were reaching that decision. And I really think that metrics, not only personally do I think that they're needed, but it adds clarity to why you're deciding what you're deciding. And I think just wanted to say that without that, I can just see a similar situation as to when the board first determined there was face-to-face. So I appreciate your efforts, and I urge you all to continue to talk with our experts and keep that in mind, and just that I do think metrics are important and that they are needed. Thank you.
Mom, I need glue.
Up next is Mr. Robert Gibbs. Okay, I'm not finding Mr. Bibb, so we'll move on. Andrew Brock. Andrew?
Yes, this is Andrew Brock. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thanks very much for your time today. I wanted to, before I begin, just to level set a bit on where we are within this process. We are now 9 months since the last day of, roughly since the last day of school. And this week will be the last day of school for this year. So it might as well be about 10 months since we started this process. We are 10 months in, and I found tonight's conversation both very encouraging and both very frustrating at the other side. I'm very encouraged because we're exploring realistic possibilities of how we get our students back face to face since they last sat in a classroom around March 15th. However, it's incredibly frustrating listening to conversations about metrics and what is contact tracing in December, when it feels like those conversations should have been happening concurrently from the day after school closed all the way through the summer and into the fall. And yet we're still having those same conversations today with no real clarity on the decision-making process in sight. We still don't have a real sense of when we can reopen schools and cannot. That is exceptionally frustrating 10 months on. Furthermore, I think one of the board members captured really concisely one of my biggest frustrations is we talk about we have the best metrics and the best mitigations. We've gone above and beyond, yet the best we can offer for our students sitting at home is half a day for pre-K through 5 and no in-person learning for 6 through 12. It's really hard for me to square that circle. The logic doesn't seem to make sense. If we have gone that far above and beyond, then we should be able to join all of the other schools and districts, not only in our state, but across the Southeast, in going full on face-to-face back in person. So it leads me to ask this question. Why are we still stuck in neutral? Why can't we make decisions? We need to, at some point when this is all over, step back and re-examine how our leadership and as a community, we make effective decisions on a going forward basis in times of crisis. This has been mostly a catastrophic failure for all. And lots of families are suffering and lots of folks are frustrated with both the process and the output. Finally, I'll close with this. And this is one of the greatest frustrations I have. Tomorrow morning at 8:30 in the morning, two things are going to happen. St. Thomas More is going to teach all of their students in person, face to face, and my children are going to log into a computer in the same neighborhood. Thanks so much for your time this evening.
Thank you. We have 6 more public comments. The next up is Ms. Megan Ferguson. Ferguson, can you hear
Yes,
us?
you all hear me okay?
Yes, we do.
My name is Megan Ferguson. I am a CSD resident, parent, and community member. I did not plan to speak tonight, but as I was listening, I was more than moved to sign up for public comment. I spoke to the board in support of virtual learning back in July. At that time, I expressed the need for the safety of all of our community members, especially considering our proportion of African-American staff and those with additional risk factors. I have used platforms available to me, including communication with my school leadership, colleagues, and Dr. Duty, and the school board. I volunteered as a part of the FAVE team to help figure out concurrent models, including having my 2 children participate in the demos for the benefit of the community at large. I volunteered hours and hours of my time to be a part of the community stakeholder committee, including missing my son's 9th birthday dinner in my own house. I'm saying all this to say that I'm highly offended by some of the comments of some board members and the implications of some community members today. To listen to multiple board members and community members imply that teachers are falling down on their job, that somehow they are not doing all that they can is inexcusable. To hear my colleagues share the unkind, downright mean, nasty, mean-spirited emails from parents is equally shameful. Could it be true that some teachers can do more? Sure. Is it also possible that some parents can do more? Yes. Is it possible that the community could do better so we are all safe? Absolutely. This situation is hard, full stop. It is important at this time that as a community, we first pick up the mirror before picking up a magnifying glass. In March, teachers were lauded, and now we're back to the bottom of the barrel. I've accepted that I've exercised all that I can to contribute to making this a safe and productive return while honoring and amplifying the voices of all staff members. And I'm speaking on behalf of the people who helped to make this community what it is, the people whose expertise is used to justify the purchase of million-dollar homes, to say that this community and this board cannot continue to disparage our efforts. While everyone's struggles are their reality, it is not everyone's reality, and thusly does not excuse the scapegoating and blaming. I will reiterate the points that I share in the community with friends, with neighbors, with colleagues, with Dr. Furman, with Dr. Duty, with Christy Beam, with the stakeholder committee, and with my principal, Ms. Newton Scott, and with anyone else who is listening. Teachers and staff did not create this pandemic. Teachers are not mental health professionals. And despite the sheer disrespect we have endured, we still show up for the kids, even when sometimes their parents won't, don't, or can't. We are professionals and we demand your respect. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ferguson. Next up is Shayla Hamer. Ms. Hamer?
Good evening.
Good evening.
Sorry about that. I hadn't planned to speak this evening. And quite frankly, come January, we may or may not have a CSD student in the system. I am currently a parent of a first grader at Winona Park Elementary. I also have a fourth grader at St. Thomas More. I have a 3-year-old in person at Decatur First Preschool. Like I said, I hadn't planned on speaking, but I felt as if it was important to address the decision regarding metrics. I agree with a lot of the previous speakers this evening that it's disappointing that it's now December. We do not have a lot of clarification regarding dates to return, how to return, metrics to return. We're still discussing things that are critical to make this happen. And that's one of the reasons why we may not have a child at CSD for a long time coming. With that, we are still CSD parents and CSD community members. My main question is, I know we've heard a lot about the fact that the max spread of, intolerably high community spread would be 200 per 100,000 in the community. I agree. I think it's an arbitrary number. I think we need to ask ourselves, I think the board and Dr. Duty needs to ask themselves, what is the difference between 200 cases per 100,000 or where we're at today of 365 cases per 100,000? Is there a huge difference in that, especially when it comes to returning to school? With proper mitigations in place, this may be irrelevant. And we're hung up on it. We're in December and we still don't know if we're returning to school. It's just disheartening. It's concerning. And one of the reasons we may or may not have children in the CSD community coming in 2021. I think we need to compare that risk of community spread of 200 versus 365 per 100,000 people to the risk of what's happening by keeping all of our CSD children virtual for school. What are the mental health implications? What are the other implications? What are the other risks happening in this community compared to the relative risk of contracting COVID-19? The families that choose, the teachers that choose and want to be back in the school for many, many, many good reasons should have that choice. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next up is Mr. Robert Bibb. Okay, I'm not seeing Mr. Bibb. I'm gonna move on with Gabrielle Richardson.
Hey there, can you guys hear me? So, I'd like to thank everyone for their time, and I'd like to thank everyone for their comments so far. I'm a student at Decatur High School, and I suffer from several learning disabilities and issues that I face every day. And I can say that online has been very, very difficult for me. But I still am very, very against the many people who are saying that we have to neglect metrics and that there are other things that we need to take more into consideration. I think the neglect for the CDC guidelines it's completely irrational. And although they can say that there are anecdotal accounts of other schools that are doing fine, I think as a country, we can tell that we aren't doing fine. We're worse than anywhere else. And look at Europe, look at all the other nations where they are back in school and it's working for them. The difference with them is that they have communities that have shut down the bars, that have shut down the restaurants, and it's obvious that we aren't mature enough to make that decision. You can go in downtown Decatur and we continue to see people out and about. It's clear that we're not taking responsibility for this thing as much as we have to. And I think for somebody to say that we can neglect metrics because we have mitigation strategies is completely, it's frankly scary. I think also if you look at Mr. Fauci, Dr. Fauci's comments about going back to school, I think he does say that he's said several times that going back to school is something that's very important. And I think that's something that it's something that we really do need to work on. I hate to see all the stories of everyone else like me who's been struggling with online. But his comment can't be taken out of context that we should close down other things that are causing spread in order to open schools. Just because schools aren't the epicenter for spread, it doesn't mean that we can just ignore the real risk that it will still pose. Just because other things are causing more spread doesn't mean that we should just ignore that. Honestly, I think that if we could all really agree on a metric by a certain date, or we could look at the change, we could look at how it's decreasing or increasing, anything like that would be better than just throwing out of the picture metrics and just saying that mitigation is all we need. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is John Richter.
Hi, evening. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Thank you. Good evening. Thank you for your time. I'm a CSD parent. We have 4 children. We have 1 child at Winona Park, 2 at Tally, and we have a 3-year-old that's home with us this year. While I'm happy that this plan would get my kids back in school, they're all K through 5, I feel for the other older children as they also deserve a chance for face-to-face education. A board member noted earlier that we're a top school district, and I agree, that's why we moved here. And that's why a lot of people choose to live here. Most of our peers in size and performance, like City of Beaufort and Oconee County, went back to school in August with face-to-face. All of our peers and performance levels have been back for months. All private schools in the area have been open for months or since August. As of mid-November, we were one of 10 districts out of 175 in Georgia that wasn't offering in person. The other districts that remain closed rank among the worst in the state. Why isn't Decatur back, and why are we acting like a failing school district? Why wasn't all the planning and discussion that we're still hung up on done this summer? like everyone else. It is mid-December. All the other superintendents put plans in place and have figured out how to reopen to some degree. Everyone else seems like they've found a way. I judge our district's leaders against how their peers are performing, and on that objective measure, you have all failed. Our children deserve better. I see it very simply. Everyone else is open and we aren't. We need to reopen like everyone else. We need to stop making excuses and doing endless planning, all while our kids fall behind every day. They don't even have school on Wednesdays, which is 20% of their week. I'm sure the board senses it from the email volume, but our community is incredibly divided. The lack of leadership is pitting neighbors against neighbors, neighbors against teachers. It's toxic. I'm tired of talking to friends and neighbors to hear that they're considering moving or unenrolling their children to homeschool them or unenrolling their children to send them to private school. We are personally struggling with the decision if we need to move for our kids' sake to get what they deserve, even though we don't want to move. We won't be the first district back. We'll be one of the last. It's time to put the children first. You need not ask, is it 100% safe, but is it safe enough? I've heard from staff and in the meeting tonight that our mitigation plan is among the best in any area district, yet we remain closed. Why is that? Do you have a plan for catching kids up once we reopen? Is there a plan? At this point, it seems like we're still digging the hole. How did we get here? Our leadership failed to make and implement a plan. We've been stuck for months in the development phase, endlessly debating safe metrics. I have completely lost faith in the ability of the leadership, particularly the superintendent. I know many other families feel the same way, and I don't know how you can restore trust without a major leadership change. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, John. Next up, and should be our final person, Luana Batra. Can you hear?
Hi, can you hear me? This is Dhwani Batra here. Hi. So I signed up at the very last minute at the end of board discussion to offer my comments. Some things, I haven't prepared really, I'm just reacting to what I've been hearing. So forgive my extempore nature of talking. One of the things is, all the board members, thank you. When you signed up and took on this job, this is not what you were signing up for. Same with our teachers, they are not signing up to be on the battleground. Yes, they came on board to teach, but not at the risk of their lives. All the people, healthcare professionals who have spoken up and have to go in as essential worker, my thanks to you. But you come in contact with most of your patients under a lot of protection and very few at a time. These teachers who have to handle these young kids who if anybody has been to a birthday party with young kids, most parents feel exhausted after that one. These teachers would have to do it for 8 hours every single day. Saying they should just shut up and come in is not fair. But at the same time, all those kids who are struggling and are having a tough time, there has to be a way to mitigate that. That is something that board needs to focus on, is how do we meet the kids where they are? As far as I know, like one of the things that we've discussed in past is all these huge conference rooms around are open. So many hotels, so many other places. Maybe those can be areas where under supervision, those kids can do some virtual schooling right from there, not in front of the teacher, but under supervision and with some help. That's a larger pod, not a smaller pod. Maybe that is a possibility. At the same time saying like just open the school, it's simple, it's not. It is complex, it's people's lives, and it's not just death. If you are following statistics, there are 50% of the people who have long-term COVID, people who are dying 6 months after getting mild symptoms, people who are asymptomatic, suddenly dying of heart attacks. What are you trying to risk in here? This is a dangerous fire. We're still figuring everything out. And that's part of the reason I feel that the board is struggling. If these metrics and these decisions were in their hand, they would. Every time they try to come near down with something, numbers increase incredibly. It is in our hands. How many of the families that have spoken up, did you have Thanksgiving? Have you gone to some parties? Or maybe even small groups, that's where the spread is happening. What are your Christmas plans? What are your holiday plans? Look into it. It's all of us together as a community have to make the sacrifice so that our kids can go back to school. If we are not doing that, we as a community are failing our kids. not the board members, not the superintendent, and definitely not the teachers. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I think, did Mr. Bibb
You back? Mr. Bibb, are you out there?
Because you may have called it.
So if anybody would like to comment, typically we don't. If y'all would like to, I don't feel the need.
I would like to just clarify, because I feel like maybe some of my comments were misunderstood, just based on some of the comments I just heard. I want it to be clear that I am not anti-metric. I am very much pro-metric. My challenge is that if there is a number, I don't know what it is, and I find it hard to pick one. So yes, I do agree, and we have said, let's go back to our committee and have them help us. But I do also feel that the metrics serve very much as a guide and not necessarily as a full stop, full go. And we are not saying if metrics are below a certain number that we are not at all discussing fully opening the schools. Quite the contrary. We're talking about very cautious, partial opening with every possible consideration we can make, both for teachers with the accommodation process and the secondary accommodation process for family members and for families to have a choice. And I do think that we should rely on metrics and we should watch them, and they should guide us in how carefully we implement all of our mitigation strategies. I'm simply saying that, as a board member, if there is a number out there, I don't know what it is, and to what Louis said, I don't believe the CDC has told us how to exactly define highest risk, and so yeah, if it's above a certain number, we know it's very, very high, and that we need to take every precaution we possibly can. But then we also have to weigh and balance the pros and the cons of getting a small or a carefully selected group of students back who really need it. And so, I just urge community members to really try to see that there is a balance here that we are carefully measuring, and that I think every board member has made good points. I think that's a really difficult decision for us to make, and that's why we have delegated that decision to Dr. Duty and his staff, who have the committee of teachers, who also have a very knowledgeable committee of community members. And so I just wanted to clarify that, because I felt like my comments were somewhat taken or somewhat misinterpreted by some.
Not really a comment, but it's just a question that I wanted to give to Maggie and ask if she could get back to us on it. Did the TAC give a number? If there could be some follow-up. I know that Dr. Duty met with the TAC prior to the school board meeting tonight, and I was curious as to if the TAC gave a number. That's it.
No, they did not. They asked that we consider a number, particularly a secondary number, for the next gradual level of return.
So just a clarification, they weren't looking for a number for this first phase, or were they asking?
No, they weren't looking for a number for this first phase. They wanted a number when we start doing the next phase.
Okay, and I feel like that point was completely missed. It was completely missed by me. I feel like it was completely missed by everyone who just commented. So do you mind repeating that and clarifying that? Because are we saying then that, I guess I just need you to clarify that.
Yeah, so the TAC, and was also in there, and I jumped in at the end. So when I was listening to TAC, so they felt very comfortable with moving forward with hybrid plan B, starting in January, with then looking at what the metrics would look like for next phase hybrid C.
Okay, does that seem like what you guys understood previously? Because I'm sorry that I missed that, but I'm glad to know that that's the clarification. I think that's very, very important to clarify now that, unfortunately, most people have probably left the call.
I don't know if,
Because I thought the conversation was about all of it.
I think when the question was introduced, David asked a question about all of it.
Yeah.
I think he also said that he, and I assume TAC, felt comfortable moving forward with hybrid plan B, but asked their opinion about all of it.
Yes.
So I think
Okay.
the council.
Okay, well, that's good. I mean, I think that's good, that we have that solid recommendation from them. I just think we need to make sure we communicate that, because I feel like, based on the comments, I feel like that might have been missed.
okay, yeah, we'll make sure we put that out in our staff and parent communications going out tomorrow.
So is the date for plan for hybrid B set as January 19th? That is their recommendation?
That's the recommendation,
Okay,
yes.
so,
I have written down that he said that they wanted a metric for the.
To move into hybrid plan C.
okay.
Just got a text from a PAC member that he said that they wanted metrics,
For phase one.
for-
That is not my reflection, so
Okay, well, I guess, are giving it back saying,
I'll dig into that a little further.
okay.
So I feel like I've expressed myself, and I either did it clearly or not clearly enough. Now, I think that the way that Heather expressed it is the way that I see it, which is that metrics are important, important indicators. The question is how you use them, whether they're the sole basis for making a decision. And that's a question. And I would like to have a more nuanced decision-making process than that. But I won't say any more about that. The one thing that disturbs me in the comments is a suggestion, and this is not one who was calling names, so I don't know who the target was, but that somebody had expressed disrespect for teachers or had suggested that the teachers weren't giving their all. I don't think anybody, I didn't hear it, and I don't think anybody feels it. And I think that we all understand and appreciate and are grateful for all the efforts of our teachers and staff. And I mean, this isn't easy for anybody, and I think it's absolutely understood that everybody is doing their level best to do right by all the kids. When I've expressed that I believe that the level best isn't good enough for some of them, it's not because of any failure on the part of our teachers and their effort and the attention that they're giving to virtual learning. It's because this platform just doesn't work for some kids. So it's not a criticism of people. It's a sort of despair at the situation, and what I would like to be an honest recognition that it does not work for everybody. And it's not, again, criticism. I just think it's a that's I think that I can hold teachers in very high esteem, which I do, and at the same time say this virtual platform is going to leave a lot of our kids behind. That's all I intended to say. With that, I think we probably need to move on, unless there's, okay. Let me find the agenda. So, Maggie, are you prepared with the superintendent? We should say that Dr. Duty has had to leave to address an emergency during the meeting. So he's not currently with us, and as a result, I think we're going to have to skip the superintendent's report. So let's see. So next we have the chair's report, which I'll do my best to do. It's the number of folks in our community, in our school, that need to be recognized. And the first is our Hometown Heroes. This is the Decatur Business Association award every year that's all of the great community volunteers who contribute to make Decatur what it is. And this year, we have 3 of our 2020 Hometown Heroes are DHS students. Dax Pettis, Genesis Reddix, and Lauren Williams. Congrats to these 3 incredible DHS students. their role in getting the monuments removed on the square. But I'm not certain. Anyway, congratulations. I think that's great, and it is a great, if we can sort of bask in their glory, right? This means that we can take some credit that we're doing right by these kids, that they're contributing to our community already in that way. We have another hometown hero that who is our very own Jana Johnson Davis and her husband Maoli, along with I think the other founders. Does recognition go to the entire executive board and founders of the Beacon Hill Black Alliance for Human Rights, Jana?
Yes, that's correct.
That is wonderful, and again, this is an organization that is making a giant, positive, great difference in Decatur, and congratulations, Janet, it's well deserved. Congratulations.
Thank you.
To the rest of the organization. The last one is Decatur Parent Network, Jennifer Walcott, and former CSD employee who continues to make contributions to the city. So thank you to all of you and all that you do. Next, we wanted to recognize our REACH scholars. These are the scholars who are selected, I think, in 8th grade and have been guaranteed admission into, I should be careful saying, are they guaranteed admission into the flagship schools, or are they, who can help question?
They get a scholarship.
They get a scholarship, okay. So we have 5 new REACH Georgia scholars for the 2021 school year. Let's see, REACH is a mentoring program established by the Georgia Student Finance Commission and supported by our DEF, Decatur Education Foundation. The 5 outstanding Renfro 8th grade students this year are Hawa Abshiro, Jada Ponder, Javante Ponder, Keith Simon, Timaya Warner. Apologies if I didn't get the pronunciation right. Previously, we only had 3 8th graders who received this scholarship, and now it's 5. And I think that's thanks in large part, or maybe entirely, to the generous contributions and support of DEF. So thank you to all, and congratulations to our REACH scholars. The next is, I don't know, kind of the most fun, at least in some ways, which is that our DHS football team made it to the state playoffs for the first time in 17 years. It is a tragedy that this occurred when we weren't all going to the football games every Friday night. The one day game that I was able to attend was terrific, and the atmosphere, it was just different. And it was really wonderful to see a winning team, out on the field. And, they made it through the first round of the playoffs. They did lose to Blessed Trinity in the second round, and so their season is over. But this is a tremendous accomplishment for the team, and so they deserve congratulations. And we are all looking forward to great things next year. So, finally, we also wanted to recognize one of our staff members, Natalie Bunchu, who for the last 12 years has been one of the most dedicated champions of the Girls on the Run program during her time as a CSD teacher at both Claremont and Talley. So the Girls on the Run program is a community program, but Ms. Bunchu volunteers her time after school. She started as a volunteer coach while teaching at Claremont, where she was always attuned to her students' needs and always ensuring that all of her girls could equally access the program. So our local Girls on the Run representative sent this message to City Commissioner Kelly Walsh about Ms. Bunchu's dedication to Girls on the Run. She said, "We deeply appreciate the optimism, determination, and tireless effort that Natalie brings to her leadership and the obvious joy that she has coaching her girls. She knows girls need the social, emotional, and physical benefits of Girls on the Run, not to mention fun. She truly makes magic happen. give girls access to our program. So we're lucky to have employees like Ms. Bunchu, and it is especially wonderful when we start getting requests from our city commissioners who notice the impact that our teachers are making in the community with their volunteer efforts after hours and asking that they be recognized. So thank you so much to Ms. Bunchu and for all that you do with these kids, and keep it up. So that's my,
Wait, there are two more.
oh, there's two more. Thank you, Heather.
You have them though.
I know, but I'm not going to find it. You do it?
Yeah, I don't have it in front of me, but I, just two more, I think, positive things to mention. Dr. Huston McCraney is having her second optional outdoor, socially distant run for orchestra practice tomorrow, and I think it's commendable that she's taken this initiative and has shown some ingenuity into how to do that in these circumstances. And tomorrow they're going to be playing some chamber music in pairs, and so she's able to then give them some instruction. And so just recently they got to meet her for the first time in person, so that's pretty spectacular, and I know it energized the kids. Also, another announcement that the Decatur High School swim team is having their first meet against Woodward Academy, following all COVID procedures. And Coach Kim, sorry, I'm blanking. See, this is why I need my notes. Liz, can you flip? What is her last name? Sorry. Can you flip to your email that I sent you? I want to make sure to say her name.
Kim Buckley.
Yeah, thank you. Kim Buckley, Coach Kim Buckley, has also taken the initiative to get a proposal approved for the swim team to be able to practice and compete. And they're following all sorts of strict COVID protocols. So just kudos to her for that extra initiative, and good luck to the swimmers, and go Bulldogs.
Thank you. Okay, is that any other kudos? Okay. Okay, that wraps up the chair's report, and we'll next move on and try to march down the agenda. First, we have our consent items, with the exception of Romanet 4 of the bond resolution, which we've moved to an action item. So we have a motion to approve the first three consent items: the personnel report, the nutrition report, and the financial report. I move.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so that the consent items passed. Let's now move to the bond resolution. Maggie, are you able to introduce the?
I will. Good evening, everyone. At the November 10th board meeting, the board approved an authorizing resolution allowing the district to pursue the potential refinancing opportunity for the 2010 series bond. A request for proposal was issued to over 25 local, regional, and national lending institutions, and 5 proposals were received. Proposed interest rates from the 5 lending institutes range from 1.79% to 2.28%. This resolution is recommending that the proposal from Truist Bank be accepted based primarily on Truist Bank proposal of the lowest interest rate. Truist's proposed interest rate results in 18% savings, which is 6 times more than the industry standard of 3% and equates to approximately 1.6 million net budgetary savings over the life of the debt. Thank you to the superintendent and the board for taking advantage of this opportunity and being good stewards of the taxpayers' fund. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. And just to be clear, James is recusing from this vote, and it was on the consent agenda because we've discussed it in the past, but that's the only reason that it's pulled. Do we have a motion to approve the bond resolution?
To approve the bond resolution. Second.
All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Aye. Thank you, Lenita. This is very good work.
It's a huge savings.
Looking after our money.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, this moves us to the other action items. We should start with the Senior Homestead Exemption Committee report, which, is there anybody here who having enough in their head to introduce the report.
Did you see the email that came through concerning the committee?
Yeah.
I did not.
It just came through not too long ago.
I'm happy to kind of read it. I got it a little earlier because unfortunately the acronym for it has been very similar to the CSD, so, and I was on both. But Paula Collins, who again took the lead as the chair of that, sent this report to us. We got a final study back from Georgia State asking them to, run the numbers for us, given that we had discussed the tax exemption and the difference that went out in our newsletter, that was what we were considering. They came back, and the committee has just said that there should be 2 exemptions in their opinion. Number one, that homeowners aged 65 to 69 who have a federally adjusted income of less than $52,000, which is 80% of the adjusted median income for the greater Atlanta metro area, should qualify for the exemption. The exemption is going to be the same for both, which is $400,000 of value of their house, or $200,000 of assessed value is their recommendation. Georgia State said that was well within the parameters that we gave them, assuming a growth rate that we'd asked them to come back. Exemption number 2 said that all homeowners at age 70 and above would qualify for that same exemption, $400,000 in assessed value. So if your home value is less than $400,000, no taxes. If your home has a value greater than $400,000 and you are currently taking the S3 exemption, that's one of the exemptions that's on the book, it was a huge part of the Senior Homestead Committee's time, then you would be required to pay taxes on the remaining value of your home, which with S3 would be above about $500,000. And homes with values greater than 400 who don't qualify for S3, you would only pay the property taxes above 400,000 in assessed value. And you may, and the committee also asked us to work with the city because there are a number of senior homestead versions of the exemption that are currently on the books that are going to remain on the books for seniors to see if they qualify for it. They also provided a great flow chart as advice for us as we begin our communication process with the committee. And I mentioned that to you, which is why I should have realized when you didn't know it, that it was not sent to CSD, but to SHC, whatever. It's the wrong thing.
I want to clarify.
Okay.
Are we talking about 200,000 assessed value, which equates to 400,000 appraised value?
Correct. Correct.
The exemption would be for the first $200,000 in assessed value across the 2 categories.
Correct. And that is that's something that we've realized as we, talk about it, but the average senior doesn't. So you have to be careful when you talk about it. Your tax assessed value is usually divided in half when they do it. It's how the millage rate works. You divide it in half, multiply it times 1,000, multiply it by your mills, that's going to be your annual tax rate. So you often will see it that way. We're talking about 200,000, which is actually 400,000 if you look at your tax bill.
And so we basically have consensus on this. The committee has given us, as we said every time we talked about it, I think a really cleverly and well-structured exemption that achieves the objectives to a large degree that we set out to achieve. And we now have the numbers because we've gone back to GSU, which has been very gracious in accommodating our repeated requests for information. And finally, I think we're ready to vote on an exemption like this. We don't have a resolution. It occurred to me before the meeting that we should have had one. So I don't even know what the motion should be, but I think what needs to happen is that we do need to vote, and I think that we then need to present a request or recommendation to the city, which has an upcoming city commission meeting, and we should ask if they would lend their support to our proposed homestead exemption, and then we need to get active with our delegation to seek their help to get it passed, to become law. Is anyone clever enough to draft or make a motion here on the fly?
Motion to accept the proposal from the Homestead Exemption Committee, and to move to the next phase of approaching the city with our plan.
Outstanding. Do we have a second?
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We might want to follow up and have some kind of a resolution. It's a little bit more formal, and maybe after the meeting, but we're all in agreement. So I think we can pass around. Is that good? Good. All right. Thanks once again to our committee. Can't thank you enough. It's been a long, hard process. It really has. And folks, while all these other things have been going on, these members of our committee have devoted quite a bit of time to getting this right. And I think they did, and we did. We're in a good place for it. Thank them for all their efforts. Okay. Board newsletter discussion.
I mean, I think we continue with the topics that we've had, and if anyone has any new ones. I did notice there was an error in one of the newsletters, and I think we need to just be very, very careful. I think generally, I think we all need to have proofread it carefully, well in advance, and I would like actually to ask our communications staff to please give it one final read before it goes out, because I think I noticed in one of the newsletters it said our millage rate was 22.25%, or 22.25, and it's 20.25. And that's a pretty significant error. So I just want to, like, I know we got most of it right, but that's one little thing that's kind of significant. So maybe we just need a little more help to proofread it. Yeah. But I think it's great. I mean, I think it's succinct and hits the points, and I think it's good that we're doing the outreach we're doing proactively to our elected officials, and I'm getting some good response.
Well, yeah,
It wouldn't happen
you
if
say me, I tried to say it.
So thank you.
And the committee's been very helpful as well. I mean, I tried to say it creatively and ended up not saying it correctly, and Heather corrected me, so we do need to
Sometimes
proofread.
it's a typo, you
Yeah.
know, so.
In my case, it was not. So.
In the interest of the newsletter, like the content of the newsletter, I did want to mention that we had a positive meeting with the DeKalb County School Board and the DeKalb County Legislative Delegation earlier this month. Frankly, I can't remember when it was, but it was sometime in the recent past, and I think since the last meeting. And working, towards a resolution of the longstanding concern about the impact of City of Decatur annexations on the DeKalb school finances. We have a proposal that we've been offering that I think makes, basically the way we said it, is that it keeps Decatur together while it keeps the DeKalb County school system whole. We're trying to do right by everybody, and I think there's an interest in pursuing this, and so we'll see where that goes. But I wanted to mention that we're making progress along those lines. Let's see. The next big question is whether we're going to, on the agenda is for discussion. It's the enrollment projections of report.
There's no discussion for that. It was just shared with you for your information.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's what I wanted to hear. Or suggest.
Yes, no, just FYI.
All right, so that brings us to future dates. Never clear if there is a future anymore. We don't have any future dates on the list. Do you have any to note?
I think there is a work session that needs scheduled for January, particularly for the board to work on the accreditation items that are yours to.
We have a date for that, I think.
You do? Okay.
Don't we have a work session January 7th?
There's future dates right there. Thursday, January 7th is when we have the board work session. Okay. That was the only one I knew.
And then, of course, our next board meeting will be January 12th. We do have an executive session on the books for now, in case we need it.
I wonder if we might consider, one of the things that's happened with all that's going on is that we've gotten off our schedule. And what we had been trying to do was to have a work session basically every month. to pick up the various things that need to be picked up. We haven't scheduled one for December, but I
Didn't we
mean,
just
one
have one?
thing, what's that?
We just had one on Thursday.
No, we didn't. We just had one.
That was December.
All right. All right, never mind. So the next is in January.
Yeah, Chris,
So we have it already on the 7th, and so I guess what we can do too, hopefully, is get back on schedule the way we used to have it, where we have board meetings on the second Tuesday and then work sessions on the fourth Tuesday. Because the way our sessions are running right now, the work session is like a few days before board, and that's kind of a lot. So maybe we get back to just going ahead and putting a placeholder for February 23rd to be our next work session, and
And I should
get
have
back to
asked-
that schedule.
I should have asked, instead of making a joke, I should have asked, why, is there something that you think is pressing that we need to talk about before the new year?
No, I was really trying to fill a slot. And I think that there's plenty that we need to do. And
Okay.
so I think that we should take the opportunity to have these meetings, because we need to talk about our monitoring reports. We need to return to the discussion about the board marks.
Yeah.
There's a number that I think need addressing, and so I think we need to not pass up those meetings. I also think that if one a month is quite enough, so. I just forgot
And
about.
soon, I think we'll be talking about, or, you know, next year in,
Budget.
yeah.
Yeah.
Me too.
Okay.
And I don't,
Janet?
I don't know if this is, it's a little off topic, but I sent several emails asking for clarification from the TAC, asking for clarification from Maggie about the metrics, the TAC wanting metrics for phase 1.
Yeah, so, thank you, Jana. So, I did email TAC and asked them to clarify, their information. So, first of all, I want to make sure that people know TAC did not create this plan. This was definitely worked on at the district level. And then we reviewed it with TAC prior to this meeting. And that TAC is saying that they would like to see metrics for any steps moving forward.
Okay, thank you for that.
Yep.
Janet and Maggie.
Thank you.
If there's no other business, is there?
I don't think so.
Okay, then we are adjourned. Thank you for everyone for joining us, and we will see you next time.
Good night.
Good night.
Yeah, I mean,